roll. Chair Tanaka?
Here.
Councilmember Vinker?
Here.
Councilmember Lowing?
Here.
For the record, all present.
Great. Okay, let's start the agenda with public comment. Do we have members of the public? And if so, can you call them one at a time, 3 minutes each?
It appears that we have no requests to speak.
Okay, let's go to the first action item. So the first action item is Office of the City Auditor presentation of the remote and flexible work study report. Does staff have anything that they'll like to present?
Yes, we have with us this evening Allison LeMay, who will present the remote and flexible work study report, and Jimmy Perry, who will present the electronic payment process and controls report. So I'll turn this over to Allison.
And the way I like to run the meeting today is, as you present it, if my colleagues have questions, because it's a small group, just press your button and say something so that we could try to have the discussion with the thread that's being presented instead of having to go back, okay? The other thing is I asked our representative from the city clerk's office to also kind of keep a chart on pros and cons on different items. So you'll see her put that up as well. So why don't you go ahead?
Okay. One thing that I just wanted to mention before Allison begins is that in one of the previous meetings, we had some discussions around the format of the report such that we would minimize your need to kind of flip pages. And so these two reports were already completed while we were having those discussions. So any reports going forward are going to have the entire observation content as well as recommendations and responses all together on the same page. Okay.
Since we're being informal, may I just jump in? Yeah, because to me, again, though, I like the recommendation response charts at the end because that's where the issues are joined. And so I still think, I mean, that's where I focus a lot of my comments to see where there was agreement that we don't need to disturb. So I actually like that piece of your report, but thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, I don't know if the city clerk, do you actually have printouts of the actual staff reports here as well? Okay. Do we have it there? Okay. Okay, can you go look for it and get it to me, please? Okay, thanks. Okay.
Is there something you want with this? Yes. But would you need to leave
Okay. Allison, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Are we ready on that side as well?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for your time today. I'll start out here with just a quick overview of the objectives and the scope of the project here. So overall objectives for the remote work study were to evaluate the alignment of your remote work policy and procedures compared to best practices. And then also to help you identify a way to assess position eligibility and building out a framework for criteria to assess that position eligibility. The project came about, just to give you a little bit of background here. We initiated this project back in right around June of 2021, June 2022. And as part of this, really, the idea was that you were coming back from remote work and a hybrid work environment after the pandemic. And so wanting to build in what we were hearing was we wanted to build in a little bit of additional structure, see where you're at compared to other organizations, and then build in a little bit of standardization on who was eligible and who wasn't eligible for work. Overall, just from a project approach perspective, we primarily spoke with human resources management staff. So we got to work with your HR director right before leaving for momentarily, and then also with your interim HR director, who's looks like was recently approved as your HR current HR director, as well as an assistant HR director. We also reviewed your remote work policy. At the time, it was called the telework policy. Since then, it's switched over to a title of a hybrid work policy, as well as the hybrid work agreement form. So just an overview quickly of the recommendations, the findings and the recommendations that were made in the report. There are 3 findings as a whole, and then there's one kind of overall just opportunity that was included in the back end there. We'll go into these a little bit more detail in this discussion, but the finding 1 has modification recommendations for your remote work policy. Finding 2 has recommendations to modify your remote work agreement form that the employee signs. And then finding 3 provides that criteria for evaluating position eligibility. And then the opportunity section that is there talks about kind of pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and then post-pandemic market conditions and industry conditions for remote work. And as I'm talking through here, I'm going to be using remote work, telework, and hybrid work a little bit interchangeably. Within the report, we stay consistent, but as I'm saying that, I'm using remote work in a broad sense as far as just eligibility to work remotely 1 or more days a week here. So digging in a little bit deeper than here, we can start out with policy or with finding 1. And finding 1, as I mentioned, was touching specifically on the your remote work policy. And what we were finding and the key recommendations that we were making in that were to include a 3-month trial basis into your policy for employees to kind of start the remote work policy from a 3-month trial basis, and then we were recommending regular touch bases with that employee, and then having a formal kind of evaluation of how the remote work implementation was going in order to assess the continuation of it. We were also recommending in that policy a requirement for satisfactory performance review. Disclaimer in there for understanding that it was the employee's responsibility to understand any sort of tax liability if they were, say, working out of state as part of their remote work. Signing an inventory form. The idea that remote work and then employee performance should be measured off of employee outputs rather than just employee presence. And then we also had in there just a disclaimer that working from a remote, employees were still responsible for arranging childcare, and that there is an ad hoc disclaimer in there that employees could be work on an ad hoc basis outside of like your formal hybrid or telework policy. Overall, the recommendations that we made, the purpose behind them was really to mitigate the city's risk. So adding a little bit of clarity as far as expectations, terms in there. You'll notice, so we've got the finding and the recommendation here on the front of the report, and then towards the back of the report, I believe it's page 17 of your packet handout. We provided first the Society for Human Resources Management policy. It's a professional association that we based our recommendations on. Any of the recommendations that any of the sections that we recommended pulling into your policy, they're highlighted blue, so they're easily to see there. The document that's after that is your actual your policy that was updated June 20th, June 2020. And then those items are also in blue there, so you can easily see where we're making recommendations for insertions. And then there's also a green highlight in there, and that is pertaining to the recommendation for California labor law. Of just being very clear in there that that the employee was responsible for any employees who voluntarily work remotely are responsible for any of the equipment that they purchase, and that the city is not responsible for that. I'm happy to jump to those pages if you would like. As part of my shared screen, but I want to, otherwise we can stay here. I would just want to give you kind of that overview here.
Why don't you go ahead and jump in, just to kind of let us know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me jump down there. All right, so this is page 17 of your packet, and you can see it's the Appendix A. So this is the sample policy from the Society for Human Resources that we based a number of our recommendations on. And these are the blue sections that I alluded to that we were recommending to pull into your report. The document that follows after that is this was your remote work policy that we reviewed. And then to make it a little bit easier, obviously it's management's choice for where they're kind of inserting everything, or whether or not they were choosing to make the policy additions. We provided examples here for them to just as a starting point, so they could see if for making any additions for where it might fit into their policy. From there, here I can go ahead and I will jump over here. Management did provide a response with a partial agreement to the recommended policy, to our recommended policy changes. The key items that they had said that they would like to exclude was that 3-month trial basis. They were interpreting that as a probationary period, and they wanted employees to be eligible from day one, which we agree with. That, you know, employees can be eligible for remote work or hybrid work immediately upon hire. We were simply recommending a trial basis, so that they know that it's on a trial basis for in case you want to be pulling them back into the office. And the other item that they had took exception to was simply the recommendations for tracking the inventory that the employee would be taking with them to their home office. They said that IT already tracks all hardware and assets that are issued, and so tracking it here would be redundant. I'll pause there if you'd like.
Have you finished going over finding one?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Do my colleagues have any questions or suggestions? Just chime in.
I just had a clarification question in finding one where you said pretty close to the one on page 11.
Sure.
Some components were recommended by HR during the most recent discussions, and then the sort of confusing sentence was discussions with city management resulted in their omission from the final policy. Was that an agreed to omission?
Can you bring up the page number so we can all see it?
Yeah, it's page
That is the
11
page.
of your packet.
That is the page on the screen.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, council member, but I think that what you are referring to is this little middle sentence here.
That's right. That's right.
So the policy that we reviewed was updated June 2021. And as part of the conversations with the human resources team, they had noted that they'd made a number of different recommendations for this policy, the June 2021 policy that was reviewed. And that some of the recommendations that they had included in the initial policy were omitted out after kind of coordination and collaboration with city management.
Okay, so that's not a disagreement between you and staff, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Any other questions for finding one?
I do have one, but I'm waiting to see if my
No,
colleague
go
is.
ahead. Sorry.
Okay.
Just if you would, I think we have to.
I just didn't want to interrupt.
No problem.
Okay.
Go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. I'm looking at packet page 30, which is the chart of the recommendations and the responses from our staff. And so I note on the remote work policy finding that we're discussing that our response was that we partially agree. And one of the things that's slightly different, I think you mentioned staff taking exception to the tech policy, the equipment tracking, but you know, it does say here that incorporating an additional equipment tracking component into the hybrid work policy would be duplicative and could lead to confusing and contradictory practices. That seems compelling to me. And so my question is, are we resolved on that, or is there any continuing concerns on your part as an auditor?
As long as the inventory in your hardware is being tracked as far as what is being issued and taken, then excluding that from the policy, I don't have an issue with, no.
Okay, and I assume our staff is saying that it is in fact tracked.
Yes,
Okay, great.
yes. And we talked through that and they confirmed that.
Fabulous. And there's also the mention of making sure to implement the periodic reviews of this. And it does say, again, in the staff response that it will be, that the hybrid work policy will be reviewed periodically at a minimum annually. So again, that seems like we're in agreement there. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm struggling to find where we differ. Now, it could be there's a sentence, the penultimate sentence in that right column under finding one on page 30. I think it's just a little garbled and I can't quite parse it. So I'm wondering if perhaps our staff could interpret it for me. I'm going to read it. It says, in regards to excluding employees on probation, the city did not include this provision as providing hybrid work as an option. May offer flexibility candidates are seeking. Could you just interpret that for me? Because I think maybe a word got out of place there. Thank you.
Yes, good evening, Chair Tanaka and council members. Our intention behind this sentence is that, you know, one of the goals is recruitment and attracting talent. And so we didn't want to exclude probationary employees or new employees from the ability to work a hybrid schedule. And so that's why we were excluding that section of the recommendation.
Okay, so that's what was being referenced earlier about the 3-month thing.
Correct.
I didn't correlate this as relating to that. Okay,
Yes.
I understand that. Yeah, it seems reasonable to me. I don't have anything further. I don't think there's a lot of discord on this particular finding.
I just had one other thing, which is there the intent to pilot both the sort of what I'll call full-time work at home versus part-time work at home? Are you gonna pilot both of those, or is it all, you get the same results?
We're not piloting fully remote.
Okay,
There is a exception in the policy if a department director would like to pilot it. They would discuss that with the city manager.
okay,
But the policy revision or update states hybrid work is 2 days in the office or on site.
okay, so our policy is not gonna say, if you live in LA, you can stay there.
No, our policy states that we're supporting a hybrid work schedule, and that means 2 days on site.
Okay, thanks for
Minimum.
clarifying.
Okay, I have a few questions. First, I don't know, does anyone know how many people are doing this right now? What percentage of our workforce?
Yes, we have approximately 80 to 90% on site. So in other words, only 10 to 20% on any given day between Monday to Friday are working remote.
Okay, so about 10 to 20% are working remote.
Between Monday and Friday.
Okay. Okay. Versus, I guess, is there a difference between like Monday through Friday versus 7 days a week?
We didn't
that's
do
fine.
survey for Saturday and Sunday.
No problem. And I really like what the auditor said in terms of focusing on the performance versus time and attendance, because that doesn't make sense anymore with remote work. How is that being done? How do we move from kind of a show up kind of measurement to a performance type of measurement? Does anyone know?
Well, I guess, good evening, Chair Tanaka. I guess my question would be if you could help me understand what you mean by our current metric was time and chair. I don't know that we would necessarily agree that that
Oh,
was
I thought that's what
our
the thing
metric.
said. I thought on I thought that's what was said, was that it was, you were, I guess, initially going more from a attendance type of thing to more, and as a suggestion was to go towards more of a performance type of metric. But maybe I'm mistaken, or maybe I heard wrong.
That's why I'm trying to understand what specific, what, do you have
Oh.
a page you're referring to?
6.
If you don't mind me jumping in while you jump
Sure.
over there, yeah, I can clarify that is that it was simply a, actually, I think on page, let me jump over to page 17 here. That's one of the items that we highlighted in the Society for Human Resources policy that we're recommending and pulling over into your new policy, was just a note in the policy stating that employees would be evaluated on performance rather than evaluated on and with an emphasis on performance instead of simply like as essential, excuse me, on performance rather than, as you had said, Tanaka, Councilman Member Tanaka, time in the chair. So it was just a re-emphasis that employees should be evaluated on performance that is in here as a note.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. So how do you guys measure performance then?
The city?
The city, yeah.
Sure. So the city and our HR director can elaborate on this, but performance reviews are done annually with employees. There's a management review process that happens every fiscal year, essentially. And then for labor employees, it occurs on, or represented employees, I should say, it occurs on their anniversary date. And so depending on the job description and or the employee group that's represented by that individual, then they are done through a performance eval on an annual basis.
Okay. And so how has the performance changed as this 10 to 20% has gone remote compared to on-site?
The performance management process has remained the same. There has been no change in regards to the process for conducting.
Oh, that's not my question. My question is, how's the performance gone up, gone down, stayed the same? How has it changed with everyone on site to 10 to 20% offsite?
Well, I can speak to the comparison between 2022 to the prior year, 2021. I mean, we did see an increase in performance exceeding expectations.
Wait, you're saying the performance went up with people offsite, or performance was higher when they were? Yeah, I'm trying. Which way did it go?
Yes, with employees working remote and the hybrid schedule, we did see an increase in expectations, performance expectations. I can't compare before 21, just because I haven't evaluated it for that from that perspective.
But wasn't 21 when there was COVID? Wasn't everyone working remotely?
There was, yes, more employees working remote.
So wouldn't it be more appropriate to compare against before COVID when everyone was in the office to, let's say, now when there's more of this hybrid situation going?
As I said, I haven't evaluated pre-COVID to respond to your question.
Okay, because I think there's a lot of benefits that we get with remote work, and I'm trying to understand what the impact has been for the city in terms of performance.
So I don't know that, I think at an aggregate level, it's a little bit difficult because we have such a small population of our workforce that is working remotely. If you think about it, right, you are only having anywhere between 10 or 20% of our workforce on any given day working remotely. So the majority of our workforce is on premise, so to speak. For those that are working remotely, the managers and the departments have been working collaboratively with the employees to adjust the work. And obviously, we want to continue to offer this hybrid policy because it is a great retention and attraction tool for us from an employee standpoint. I will say that managers are also dealing with, if an individual isolated issue arises, they're dealing with that with their workforce. So if hybrid's working, they continue to support that with their employees as long as the expectations are being met. And if they're not, then our managers are having those conversations, just like the audit says, to continue this conversation and have it with the employee to make sure that the needs and the expectations are being met. And if they're not, managers are adjusting it. So for example, if you were to look at maybe 2021 or in COVID time, CSD employees were perhaps in a greater hybrid schedule than they are today. And that's because they found that as they came back to more in-person activities, they found a higher benefit from some of their employees being on site more. So they've made that adjustment. In other areas where you have primarily remote type or individual work, so let's say accountants, they've maintained their hybrid schedule where it's at 2 days on-prem, 3 days off, in large part because it works for their organization and the performance. They're meeting their expectations or exceeding them, frankly. And so they've adapted. So we don't necessarily have, because we have such diverse lines of service, each group has had to adjust to what works for that line. And that's why you do see only 10 or 20% of our workforce working hybrid.
Okay. So 10 to 20% represents how many people?
Oh, about 100 to 200.
Okay. So, that's bigger than some companies. Actually, I think that's actually a pretty good sample size. What I would suggest would be to, and some people may be new, so you can't do it. But what I would suggest is that you look at the performance before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID for the same people that are for this 10 to 20% to see how the performance has changed, and you can compare it against people that's always been on site, and that way you can kind of see how the remote hybrid change has been doing. Because I think if you just compare it during COVID and now, you don't really have a comparison because during COVID, everyone's remote, right? So anyways, so I think that's one thing I would suggest for that. But okay, my colleagues, nothing else on 1? Otherwise, let's go to 2 then.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, just go over number 2, please.
Yep. So finding number 2 is related to making modifications to the hybrid work agreement form. Again, this form was already in existence, and the updated version that we were reviewing was from June 2021. Those updates were based off of the version that we were looking at already had updates that were made to adjust for COVID at the time. The updates that we were recommending to make were to align the hybrid work agreement form with the policy based off of the recommended policy changes that we were making. The sample of that is in appendix B for you guys, and that should be page 25 of your packet. So if you bear with me, I will bring us down there here. So again, this is already the form. The city did already have this form. And the changes that we were recommending are highlighted here in blue. The changes are pulled or based off of the Society for Human Resources Association remote work agreement form, as well as agreement forms that we looked at from the International Public Management Association of Human Resources. Primary changes that we were recommending, again, we're referencing for just dependent care arrangements, noting that employees do need to report if as directed by their supervisors, they will need to report into the office. Also we made an addition there, saying that the city would have access to the home office upon request to ensure a safe and secure work arrangement there. And then there was also a couple of items in there related to, again, for agreement for what the employee was taking as far as equipment, and a clarity on the expense reimbursement to comply with the California code. I'm going to jump over here for a moment here and go down to the management responses. Management response was a partial agreement with a notes, I believe, that the terms and the criteria that we were adding in there, I believe that HR felt that the merit rules were already detailed in the existing performance requirement policy, and we're feeling that some of the additions that we had in this agreement form were redundant, and that there was interpretation of the criteria that we were making recommendations to add, that they were added with a tone of disciplinary reference and detracted from the city's performance management process. I'll pause there with any questions.
I have one if it's all right. So before you came down to this, my favorite slide here, the chart, you had stopped on page 26, and I'd actually like to go back to that because there was a provision there that I wanted to hear a little more about. And specifically, it was the employee will allow the employer to have access to the telework location for purposes of assessing safety and security upon reasonable notice by the city. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about that. My husband has worked for both the county of San Mateo and the county of Santa Clara, and he's done remote work for both.
Mm-hmm.
For one of them, he had a position where he was in possession on his laptop, his work laptop, of confidential information that, so they wanted to do an inspection before he started working at home to make sure he had a location that was private and safe for the information. For the second position, he didn't have that type of thing. And so there has been no such inspection. So what I'm wondering is, our city employs an awful lot of different folks. So what kind of criteria would you use before recommending that we do something like this? Because, it's kind of a big deal for the city to come inspect your home. So I'd want to make sure we're being careful and thoughtful and respecting privacy interests, as well as looking after the safety and security interest that you're identifying here. So could you talk a little bit more about that provision?
Absolutely. Yeah, and so we have this in here. Sometimes we have it, cities will actually encourage employees to invite them in so that they can do like an ergonomic assessment of the setup from a long-term care standpoint. We also see this in here with the purpose of, if somebody is to fall or trip, right, and they're claiming and they're wanting to put a workers' comp claim in, then on the front end you can do an assessment in order to determine that from a risk mitigation standpoint. Or on the back end, if there needs to be an investigation, also being able to come in for this. I would say the other item would be depending on the sensitivity of the information that they'll be looking at, of wanting to look at in the instance that you've given, from just an overall from a security standpoint too.
Okay, thank you. I think that there's a distinction here between, between the safety of the worker, concern for safety of the worker versus concern for safety of the city's interests, separate from the worker, such as in information and such. And this doesn't really distinguish that. And I think they're quite different. So, and it's interesting to me. Also, it talks about the telework location. I was assuming that was a home, but it need not be, I suppose. But were it to be a home, it surprises me that we would need to worry about trip and fall things, and there would be no concept of assumption of risk if you choose to work in your own home and get hurt on city time. So I'm just confused about that type of a worry falling under this provision.
Can I piggyback on that?
Sure.
Yeah, I think, if we're concerned about, for example, if this is a utilities customer service rep that's taking phone calls, and we want to make sure that there's not 3 kids and 2 dogs screaming in the background, and that's an essential part of this person's job, then I can kind of understand that. So maybe we have access to make sure that the office is suitable to the job. But it's starting to get a little bit close to invading privacy, and it seems a little contradictory to that other thing you said, which is want to emphasize the output from the work, not the process. So I agree. There's some concern here.
Yeah, I just think that if we're going to be inspecting people's homes, we ought to be very thoughtful and about how and when, and clear and objective about when that's appropriate.
I mean, in the IRS can come and audit you if you deduct the home office, and they want to do that to come in there and make sure it's not a man cave, and I think that's legit because they're investigating in a formal audit if you're breaking the law. But this is a little bit different in terms of workplace performance.
Yeah, and I'll say that the purpose of this is from a risk mitigation standpoint, for the city, as far as, again, assessing that safety and security, both for the employee from a workers' comp standpoint, security standpoint, as well as for the company assets. And so it is in here as a caveat should the city feel the need to do so, or there have been workers' comp claims in the past that have been filed that's where employees, I don't have the specific case file, but employee was working during the day, working from home, went out to their garage to grab something, tripped, fell, and was filing a workers' comp claim. It was noted as, and so it's where you choose to where you choose to evaluate your risk and mitigate your risk.
Well, so I have a question about that. So you filed a claim. Did you prevail on the claim?
I believe so, yes.
Pardon me?
I believe so, yes.
You did?
Mhm.
Okay, well then we ought to look into why that would be the case and figure out if there are, lessons learned, but that surprises me.
Just to kind of continue the conversation on this, could, as my colleague recommended, can there be some sort of provision where people have to indemnify us, or just some sort of assumption of risk waiver? So if they do trip and fall in the garage on city time, because it's their own property, we're absolved of all, legal liability. I don't know, is that a possibility?
I'd love to hear from our city attorney on that.
Sorry, yeah, I was just gonna say, as I'm not can't provide that advice from a counsel standpoint, from a liability standpoint. What I can say is from a best practice from the Society for Human Resources and other HR associations, I have not seen that in there.
Well, our city attorney's in the room, so.
Oh, perfect, great.
So I can speak to that. We're approving the agreement between the city and the employee. to work from home, and that makes us responsible for a claim. But a claim would be investigated, delayed to determine and ensure that it's a valid claim. So we wouldn't be able to seek a waiver. In reference to,
Hold on, that doesn't make sense. Why can't we just amend the agreement to have, a big waiver in there before they start? So if they want to do it, they have to accept the waiver. Why can't we do that?
What makes it a valid claim is the question. Does that have to be during work hours, or is that it?
yeah. I mean, a valid claim, meaning that it's while the employee is performing work activities. So
I just, the example we were given was in the garage, which was not at the desk in the work area. So this is odd to me.
right, I think she was stating that as an example. That's not like a city claim.
I know.
Okay. So it would have to be in the course of the duties of the job, right? And so when I say investigate, we would be doing a thorough review of where the accident occurred, how did it occur, etc. In regards to the comment about ergonomics, we do virtual ergonomic evaluations, and there's no deterrence because someone is working from home. Right, we want to provide safe work practices and ensure that employees are implementing a workspace that is safe.
So just to add a couple comments. So in general, state law does not allow employers to require employees to waive those kinds of workplace programmatic rights that are provided by the workers' comp program, and nor would the city want to, because when you are in the workers' comp program, you are both the employer and the employee are protected by the boundaries of that statutory scheme. And the system is designed, frankly, to pay out more frequently, but quite a bit less in terms of amount. And if you're not in the workers' comp system, you are in the general civil litigation system, which is often a less good outcome for the city in a marginal case. So my office doesn't generally provide workers' comp. We don't do the workers' comp work for the city. That's handled straight through HR, but I'm happy to follow up with HR and their outside counsel on this issue to look to see that we have set our procedures up in a way that's correct and in the city's best interest.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I heard this correctly. So you're saying that if we, in our work from home agreement, add a waiver saying that because it's your own home, there's small risk of injury that happens in your own home, you're saying that we get kicked out of workers' comp? Is that basically what you're saying?
I can't give you full advice on the fly like this. I will consider your comments and work with HR and we can get back to you.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I want to be very fair to our city workers, and if there's something that because of their work, they had an injury, but if it's because they have old carpet, like, is that on us?
I understand the question and the concern. It's a reasonable one. I cannot answer that today.
Okay, that's
We will
fine. I
need
just
to
want-
look into it and get back to you.
Okay, so just to clarify, it's to what degree is the city responsible for the physical plant when a worker opts to take advantage of the city's work from home policy? Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Number 3. Oh, actually, nothing. Okay, number 3.
All right, thank you. Finding number 3 is that the city did not have a standardized approach to determine position eligibility for remote or flexible work arrangements. So for a hybrid work schedule. The practice was for individual employees to request approval. And then that approval was made on a case-by-case basis. With this being specifically employee request based, there's potentially inconsistencies for which employees were being approved, and positions with similar essential duties and responsibilities being approved or not be approved for remote work based off of their supervisor's work preferences. So so our recommendation is to develop standardized criteria to first evaluate at the position level across all the positions within the city of identifying which positions based off of their essential duties and based off of the set criteria are eligible or potentially eligible for a hybrid work schedule. And then noting those in your HRIS system, and then making approval for the individual employee. And that way, when the individual employee requests. And so that way, across the city, there's standardization for which positions are eligible for remote work. And standardizing that a little bit more, and making it less at the discretion of just depending on if the department preferences for people coming into the work more. To help the city, we worked with the Human Resources Department to develop some preliminary criteria. These questions, the basis of the questions were pulled from the federal government's ONET database. We pulled from 2 different survey questions from that those ONET surveys. They're standard questions that are commonly used within human resources to help pull in their essential job duties, classification, compensation, or just doing overall position evaluations. So we went through those, started with a slightly larger list, worked with human resources to come down to this list of 13 to start out with, and then went through and essentially made some rules criteria in conjunction with the Human Resources Department, worked through this so that they could use this as a starting point and refine this as needed. Where they settled was looking at if an employee responds to a 5 for any of these questions, then that would make it so that the position is not eligible for any sort of hybrid work, because it indicates that their position responsibilities require them to be in person. Anyone who positions the score on average 1 across the board would be potentially eligible for a full remote work. And then anything that is falling within that yellow area from an average score standpoint, then they would be potentially eligible for hybrid work. We were recommending starting this from a pilot program, and then assessing that implementation, making modifications, getting feedback from some pilot departments, and then implementing this across the city. For management responses, were a partial agreement with modification of, I believe, creating this tool and then posting access to the tool on the city website for directors and managers to use to evaluate the positions, rather than allowing departments to use this on an ad hoc basis, rather than implementing this from a across the board for evaluating all positions. I'll pause there in case there are any additional questions.
If we're talking about eligibility, just to follow up on the last discussion, if it comes back that we have liability for a worker's home over which we don't have control, then I would suggest that perhaps a criterion of eligibility is that they have a safe home and they allow us to inspect at the beginning. I don't love that idea because it feels a little invasive, but I suggest that we consider that as a component if that's where the liability goes. Because why would we let someone work in an unsafe environment if that's if we're assuming the risk of their home and we can't control it like we can here?
Two comments on your eligibility graph. Certain classifications of jobs, for example, the men and women that hang up the telephone wires and electrical wires, seem like a no-brainer that they 100% of their job is, on the top of a, what are those things called, bucket thing or something like that.
Like a truck.
But I guess there's situations in which maybe someone's partial supervisor, so they can do their paperwork at home 1 day a week, things like that. But in spite of what I just said, I'm glad that you're putting this into a grid. So there is an analysis of it, not an assumption that, by definition, since they're up in trees all day, that they would never be eligible. The second is a question. I presume that the direct supervisor gets to evaluate if they believe that the answer is correct. So if this person answered that they're at a 2 once a year or more, and the boss knows that the person's up in the bucket truck every day, we're not just taking this as a self-evaluation that the manager of the department or the direct supervisor gets to effectively veto that answer. Is that correct?
That is correct. The supervisor and the department director have the final approval or decision not to approve.
Okay, great.
And in your example, the line people do not have hybrid work schedules.
Right. I mean, they would all be a 5 in this case.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, I think we're ready to go on to opportunities, or is there anything you want to cover there, or are you done?
I'll let you go ahead, and from opportunity standpoint, we do not require a management response for that. And so
Okay.
I'll just say from a note standpoint, if you'd like to take a look at it, it provides you some industry and market information as far as where remote work is going within the past 3 years, and kind of effects and considerations in order to stay market competitive from a recruitment and retention standpoint.
Okay, great. Are there any other general comments that you guys want to make or questions? Otherwise, is staff looking for a motion on this? Okay, so then maybe if you guys don't have any other comments or questions, we could move forward with the motion. So, so actually, I just want to ask: is the staff recommendation? Does it mean that it's agreeing to partially agree, or what the auditor recommended? What does the staff motion look like right now?
So your function on audits is to accept the audit.
Okay. So, okay, so it's
And I'm sorry, just to clarify, excuse me for interrupting, Chair Tanaka. It's to recommend that council accept the audit.
sure. Okay. So, okay. So by accepting the audit, it's basically not saying whether it agrees with what auditor said or what staff said, but just the report. Okay.
That the audit is thorough and appropriate and yes.
Okay.
And then
So maybe then we'll move forward with the staff recommendation with a few modifications. One of them is to compare performance against pre-COVID performance. Second one is to investigate whether we can have some sort of waiver per Councilmember Vicky's suggestion. And then And then if that is the case, to also have that as part of the criteria of whether they can work from home, is whether they have a safe home. I don't know if that captures what you said correctly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think we have to move that they accept, that move that to recommend that council
Right.
accepts the audit and.
Yeah.
These are really outside referrals. I mean, the auditor's work does not encompass ongoing management of really what is the city manager's function in managing the city workforce. So these could be referrals or could be elements of council's performance evaluation of the city manager. Yeah, I mean, normally the city's HR procedures are not subject to direct council adoption or, this is the city manager managing the workforce, which is in our code, an administrative matter that is not really within council's purview. So, I think it's something for the manager's office to think about what you want to recommend. If this is a referral to come back with additional work items on the legal issue, I think I'll chat with HR about the workers' comp advice that they've gotten, and I can send a communication. And hopefully with the communication, we can answer the basic questions about the legal framework. So I think that's relatively straightforward. But in terms of how the city wants to set up its personnel procedures, that's really not a matter that's generally part of council's purview. That's what the manager does in managing the workforce, and in the council manager form of government, that really does need to be the manager's work. So you can give direction to your city manager and evaluate his performance. Kylie?
I think you are correct. To the committee, we've heard your feedback and your comments, and I think for sure they are things that we can take into consideration in our general management. Even in the hybrid policy, I think we do say that one of the requirements of it is that you have a suitable workspace. So I think we can reevaluate whether or not that language is, one, strong enough, or two, if there's something else that we can do. But we'll take that back as some to-dos in terms of our normal course of business. Now, if there's a referral of action that you want analysis done, then you could always data on something, that could be something that you could refer to council that you recommend they refer back to staff. But in terms of changing how our HR policies are.
Yeah, and I don't think we're trying to do that so much as, in addition to recommending that council accept the auditor's report, I at least would be curious on, I would like to request for a report back on these things, because I can't believe there isn't anything. That's why I'm glad to hear you say that there isn't something in our policy already, that there has to be some suitability. So I would request that the city manager report back to us on these items, and the city attorney, and and then for further consideration by the committee.
I think we can probably do that in the cover memo when this audit goes to council.
Correct.
Yeah, I think we can do some reporting back that will speak to these concerns.
Okay, then I guess we would move that the,
Sorry, hold on. Can the clerk bring up the motion page
think-
first?
that's it. Isn't it
Oh,
the
is it?
second?
Oh, no, like this
Oh,
is,
She has this option.
oh, okay,
Yeah, thank you, sorry.
yeah. Okay, why don't you go ahead and tell?
Yeah, so if, exactly, recommend the city council accept the office of what you have here, and that and request that the city manager's office include in the staff report, in the corresponding staff report to council, what do I want to say, the current practices with respect to.
So I guess there's this measurement against pre-COVID performance, and then the other one, which is whether they could do a risk waiver or something to that effect, right? Because it sounds like the other one, which is it's a safe work environment, is already covered in under the criteria.
I'm sorry, can we see, perhaps Chair, you can restate those, your language so the clerk can capture?
Okay, so I think So maybe you could just have it in two parts, right? One is accept the audit. And then part two is something separate, which is to the city's manager's office, which is one part is compare remote work performance to pre-COVID performance. And then the second one is whether a risk waiver can be added to the remote work agreement or something. I don't know. That's not.
I think we want to get a report on the current practice with respect to requirements of the employees' remote workplace. And then that we want to understand what we're doing right now, because
Okay.
it seems like there is something. And then I think separate was our request to understand the workers' comp thing,
Okay. Does a clerk got that?
which I haven't articulated yet.
So, right, so I think that your letter C is outside the scope of this item. The audit did not look at this issue, and I realize it's related, Chair Tanaka, but I think what you'd need to do is to recommend that council ask staff to work on that issue.
Okay, sure. That we should make that modification. Can clerk do that? So it's to recommend, because we're a recommending body. So all this stuff has to be a recommendation to council. So if you could craft it that way.
It is to recommend city council seek a comparison from staff.
Oh, yeah, it already has recommended. Yeah, you're right.
It's in
You're
the-
right.
It's in the preamble.
You're right.
So
You're
you
right.
could say, C is, so we recommend the city council seek a comparison of blah, blah, blah from staff. Would that work?
I guess in all honesty, I would appreciate clarity on what the goal of this is. I'm not quite sure I understand what pre-COVID performance evaluations and post-COVID.
Oh, yeah.
In relationship to hybrid work.
Yeah, that's actually, let's try to make this a bit clearer. So to
So-
compare pre-COVID performance to pre-COVID full on-site performance versus hybrid post-COVID performance.
I guess to what end, one, and two, our workforce prior to COVID and our workforce today is different. So if you're looking at individual employee evaluations, that's a extremely arduous task, because we would need to go then find our, 100 to 200 employees that are working remotely and go look at find which ones we have continuity of in their roles.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm not understanding what, if you could help me understand what your goal is at
Sure.
the end of this,
Sure.
maybe we can.
Yeah, going remote is actually very difficult for organizations. I could tell you for myself, my own company, I went from fully on site to fully remote. And it takes a lot. I mean, it's a lot of changes that have to happen. And I think that sometimes it's smooth, sometimes it's not. And this is actually a big learning for our organization, because what you might find actually is that there's some best practices that can be spread among other workers, and that perhaps there are more jobs that can be done remotely effectively. So anyways, it's something that's a good self-learning. I mean, it's something, this is like a nice science experiment, so to speak. You could actually look at what happened and try to improve the organization from the learnings.
I think it's, if I can maybe help, I think it's just trying to show that our city staff is still providing our residents excellent, if not better, more excellent service. Because I think you said that some of the degree of exceeding expectations may have even gone up with some of this remote work. We just want to know. So it's not person to person. I mean, yes, it's a rough average, but I think what the chair is trying to get at is, are we serving the city? Is there any downturn in performance? I don't expect there will be. I'm hopeful we'll find good stuff.
Sure.
And like you say, we can attract and retain employees. I think we just want to know. Is that fair?
Yeah, thank you.
And I guess I don't understand, that's not a quantitative to me analysis. That's a far more qualitative analysis of, are we seeing ourselves having an increased number of performance conflicts, I would say, whether that's, people that are not meeting expectations and are on performance improvement plans and the like. Our ability our evaluation of whether or not remote work is impacting our services, I think, is demonstrated by our services to the community remaining uninterrupted. For example, you have the development center open 4 days a week. And so the services to the community are happening actually 5 days a week, I'm sorry, on-prem 4 days for walk-in and appointments on the 5th day. So that's kind of how we evaluate whether or not the services are being provided.
Okay, that's not what I was getting at, was sort of overall, if we're paying for enough or have the libraries open next days, it's the quality of the services that are provided. And I think, Sandra, I think you were saying, I mean, there must be these evaluations, whatever the criteria it is, meets expectations, exceeds there's some measure, I think I was hearing from you, maybe not. And just wondering if that average, performance was, static, better, worse with remote work. We just want to make sure we're doing the right thing by continuing to allow this, which I hope we are.
To me, this sounds like sort of normal best practices evaluation that HR has to do anyway, whether they're remote or not. But to me, that's kind of off the subject, because what we're talking about right now is what did the audit say that we should do going forward? Because we've already decided that we're going to do remote. So all we're trying to do in this instance is to try to create the right forms, criteria, who gets to be in there and so on. It doesn't really have anything to do this doesn't have anything. This is the process. This doesn't really have anything to do with the evaluation, which is going to happen anyway by their own managers and by the HR director. So I don't see this as a necessary coupling to our task at hand.
Thank you,
I-
Councilmember Lowing. And I think that the alarm that you're slightly hearing from the staff here is a higher level procedural as you begin to work through these audits. What comes before you is an audit that's specifically scoped, that has objectives, and the auditor is asking you to review that and recommend that it be accepted. And it includes a management response. It is not the situation that the entire work area that is the subject of the audit is before this committee for general improvement. And if this committee approaches its work in that way, we have a really serious institutional issue to address in terms of how we're going to get our work done when we've defined our priorities and have all of our projects, and we are coming to deliver a completed piece of work and getting a series of broad, interesting, perhaps valuable new assignments that haven't been integrated with the other work that we're doing. So thank you, Councilmember Lowing. I think that's what we think we're doing. And I think it's important that this committee and staff have a shared understanding of what we're doing when we're hearing audits in the committee.
In contrast, the other item that's under discussion, I feel is quite appropriate for all of us to evaluate because of the liability issues and the inspections of the offices that we're going to have to do.
So I think we hear you. I did look up the policy on that note, Councilmember Lowing, and it does say that one of the performance-based eligibility is that they maintain a suitable workspace. So there is language in there. Now, again, the degree of liability is still something that we can look at and respond back to and understand. I think we can provide some basic statistics. I think I understand where you're coming at from a performance standpoint, but otherwise understood that they are decoupled, but enlightening information.
Yes, so I think that maintaining a suitable workplace really addresses and puts the onus on the employee. That's what I was looking for earlier. I was calling it assumption of risk. Maybe they don't formally say we assume the risk, but they agree to do the thing that essentially assumes the risk. So that is helpful and answers my question on that one. I do agree our agenda item is to recommend accepting or not the audit, recommend accepting it. I do think that when significant issues come up in the course of reading the audit, that it's incumbent upon us to ask council whether or not they want to look at it and wrap it into the course of their business. It may be at the expense of something else because we have very limited bandwidth, and I understand the alarm, but I think that's what at least I'm trying to do, is not to, change policy on everything that's audited, because I understand that's not the purpose of this. But I also think that there has to be some leeway if we think there's something significant.
So I think we should change this motion to be A and then B and drop C. And I'm not sure this is exactly the right nomenclature, but we need to accept the vote on recommendation to council to accept the audit. And secondly, maybe request that the second part of B.
Okay, well, here's what I'll do. Councilmember Vinker has a motion on the floor. I'll second it. And if Councilmember Lawing, you want to disagree or split the motion, we can as well.
I would accept the friendly amendment to get rid of C, because that's what I was
Okay.
saying based on what I've now learned about
Okay,
the contract. So I don't know whether you would as a
that's
seconder.
fine.
Okay, thank you.
You want to take the vote?
Chair Tanaka,
Yes.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes,
Councilmember Lowing,
Yes.
motion carries.
Let's move on to the next item, which is Office of the City Auditor presentation of the electronic payment process and controls audit report. Does does auditor have a presentation like to go over?
Yes. Good evening. I'm Tim Perry, a manager with Baker Tilly. I manage the electronic payment process and control review and would like to present the results of this review. What you see in the presentation on the screen is a summary of the introduction section of the report. That is packet page 39 through 41, where we describe the audit objectives, background information, scope, and methodology. The reason this review was performed is that in 2021, city became a victim of a scam called business email compromise, where a scammer compromised the business email accounts through social engineering or computer intrusion techniques to conduct an unauthorized transfer of funds. Business email compromise schemes are top incident reported in 2021, according to the FBI Internet Crime Report, and California had the most victims and losses in the US. So the objectives of the review were to evaluate the adequacy and effectiveness of the internal controls to ensure that all electronic payments are valid and properly processed in compliance with the city's policy and procedures, and to determine whether end user security awareness training is sufficient to prevent erroneous payments caused by phishing. For this audit, we evaluated the design of internal controls by reviewing the automated clearinghouse or ACH and wire disbursements processed by accounts payable and treasury teams, addition and modification of banking information, and user security training. Now we reviewed observation, recommendation, and management responses in the report. We have two findings. The first finding is on packet page 45 and about electronic payment instructions. Because the incident in 2021 was that a scammer intercepted the email communication between the city and the vendor and gave the city a scammer's bank information to steal the payment. Management implemented internal control to verbally verify the banking information included in new ACH and wire payment requests and change requests. This is an important control noted in the best practice section of the report, but the city did not revise its policy to define and communicate the new control requirement. So based on our review of the new and modified vendor records, we noted that verbal verification was done only for banking information that was added or changed, not for other information such as tax number, payment method, and name. We also noted that supervisory reviews and approvals of the addition and modification of vendor records were not documented to show that a review control was performed. When the requirements for the control activities such as verbal verification and supervisory review and approval are not clearly defined in the policy, the city cannot ensure that internal controls are implemented properly and operate effectively. In the packet, page 50, we listed the recommendations and then management responses. So the finding one, we recommended that administrative service department to update the policies and procedures to clearly define the requirements of the control activities so that the control can be implemented and executed as intended. Management agreed and issued an updated policy addressing that audit findings. We also recommended to provide training on the required control activities to ensure proper implementation and execution. Also, recommended to implement a more proactive mechanism for employees who process payments to keep up with the electronic payment fraud scheme, in addition to the annual user security awareness training provided by the city. Management response was partially agreed. Management agreed the importance of the continuous training. However, management believed that sufficient mechanisms are already in place. So this is the first finding. Do you have any comments or questions? Okay.
People are still thinking here, so why don't you keep on going, and we'll interrupt you if needed.
Okay. The second finding is on packet page 46 and about ACH payments. Due to a small number of staff, there was a segregation of duties issue identified in the previous audits noted in the report.
Oh, Jimmy, actually, I did have a question for you.
Yes.
How many times has this occurred in the city's history, and how much are we talking about?
The incident, so they noted that one incident, actually they became victim of about a little less than $50,000 for that incident. And then later on, now they were paying attention. So there are 2 or 3 incidents that they actually caught, and so they didn't not have to be victim. But that's the only thing they noticed. So the way the city finds out they became a victim is when the vendors contact the city and saying that, oh, we haven't received the payment, while the city was thinking that they already paid. Then, they find out that all went to somewhere else. Yeah. So if a vendor doesn't notify the city, then we would not know. The city would not know.
Okay, so this happened one time in the city's 125-year history, and there are 2 other attempts that we thwarted, basically.
Well,
yes, but that's what we know.
Chami, if I might add in here. So I don't know that we can speak for the whole 125-year history, but at least from our experience sitting here, yes, there's only been 1 incidence of this. In terms of attempts, there are far more than 2 attempts. As a large organization, as an organization with a number of employees and activities that are happening in a very public way, we do have these attempts, and staff catch them in various ways, and that's why we have our checks and balances and policies and procedures to catch those. I couldn't give you a number though.
Definitely, this is becoming the issue everywhere. As I mentioned in the FBI reports, there are a lot going on, and we may not know that the controls are very important to catch those things. So definitely for the city, it's good to look at the control effectiveness and make sure that any deficiencies are corrected. Okay.
I was just gonna ask. I'm in the slow group over here. So on the partially agree, maybe the staff could kind of tell me what's the partial, like what difference is there, if any, in what we view we should do on this one versus what's recommended. I'm reading both and I'm not getting the difference. But this is not my area of expertise at all, so if you could help me out.
Thank you. Christine Paras, Assistant Director of ASD. Thanks for your question, Councilmember Vinker. The partially agree one refers to the training where we do agree that regular fraud training is appropriate, especially for staff. And a couple of our staff people have to keep up with annual CPE requirements. As far as a formal mechanism, that's something that we do informally within our team to share and exchange knowledge. And we don't necessarily have, a KPI of how much fraud training you've done. Rather, we share information as we get it from periodicals, Government Finance Association and CSMFO. And if training opportunities present themselves, we do that. In fact, I'll speak to this week. Our whole AP staff and our treasury manager attended a fraud recognition and prevention webinar yesterday, and we've signed up for the Baker Tilly Fraud Summit that's coming up next month. So while we have been proactive, we don't have a formal mechanism, quote unquote.
I see. Thank you. And so to our auditors, is that slight variance an acceptable amount of risk in your view? Is that an appropriate question? I mean, that's.
Yes, so the internal control, we look for something formal, because if it's informal, you can, you get missed. And then that's the time that you miss something. So we always look for the formal implementation. So I hear Christine, and I've seen some communication, they're sharing the information. So informally, I agree that they are trying to identify the schemes, try to learn. I thought that it would be more effective if you have a formal mechanism, so that they will not miss the good training they should be receiving. Or 1 year they have training, next year they don't have any training. So there will not be an inconsistency.
Thank you, Tammy. One thing I just want to also add to is every other year, our IT department requires us to do mandatory cybersecurity training. So that's, I guess, one formal mechanism that we do in the org.
Thank you both.
Question, Jamie, so with the changes that you guys recommended, would that have caught the 50K illegal transfer that happened?
Yes. So what happened is that those scammer intercepted, and they changed the email address with W, and they put the 2. So it's hard to find it. But with the training and awareness, staff would look at it closely, and they would probably find out that the email address look different, and they might have caught. So definitely the awareness and detail to attention would help the city identify more incidents.
Okay, great, thank you.
I was just going to say, in terms of comments, I would just say, I mean, it was a problem that was discovered. They're recommending new controls to fix it. So I think it's very straightforward.
Okay, why don't you keep on going?
Okay. So the second finding is about ACH payment. I mentioned earlier that there was a segregation duty issue identified in the past audit reports. Our recent review in the SAP segregation duties. So it's important to have a mitigating controls when there's segregation duty issue. So we looked at 25 ACH payments and identified the actual ACH bank account number used for the payment was different from the ACH bank account number shown on the vendor invoice for one payment. The account was closed and there was no financial loss, but the control to prevent an error like this did not operate effectively in this case. The quality and effectiveness of the independent reviews are especially crucial when the segregation duties exist. We also identified that bank online portal is used to make ACH payments. The application control regarding a dual authorization is currently in place. That means that one person initiates the transaction and somebody else must approve. So it takes two people to make a payment. The names of the individual who initiated and approved each ACH batch are listed in the reports available online for a limited time frame, but these reports were not saved offline. As a result, the audit trails evidencing that dual authorization control is working effectively are not maintained. Although the bank was able to provide information, it took a week, and it is necessary for the city to maintain the complete audit trail to be able to trace back any irregularities and investigate them when they happen. In the package, page 51, we listed the recommendations and the management responses. So the finding 2, we recommend that Administrative Service Department to work with the IT to identify the ways to improve the segregation of duties and mitigate risks. Management partially agrees. Management agrees that they need to evaluate the segregation duties as part of the phase 2 of the ERP upgrade, but disagrees because they believe the mitigating controls are already in place. We also recommend that until the segregation duties conflicts resolved, the AST management should strengthen the mitigating controls over the AP payment process by ensuring that controls are designed to mitigate risks adequately and operating effectively. Management should update the policy and procedures. So management partially agrees. They agree that the policy and procedures should be updated, but disagrees because the controls currently in place mitigates risks adequately and operate effectively. This is the conclusion of my presentation. So here's our recommendation to approve and recommend the council accept the report.
While my colleagues are gathering their thoughts, was there a criminal investigation of the 50K transfer? And if so, was the money eventually recovered? Does anyone know what happened?
Sure, I can answer that. Yes, we referred the case to our police department and they did go and research and seek to recover the funds. Ultimately, the funds were not recovered. Ultimately, the funds ended up being, or the transaction ended up being traced to a larger scam. I think almost over $1 million scam that was happening, and therefore the case was referred to the FBI. I don't know if the FBI ended up taking it up, but ultimately at that point, we concluded our investigation.
Do my colleagues have any questions, thoughts, comments?
None further from me, no.
Either one of you guys want to make a motion here?
Gonna go for it this time?
So this is the item on page 2, basically, recommend to council that they accept the city auditor presentation and audit on electronic payment process and controls audit report.
Second.
Okay, does any discussion, anyone want to speak to the motion, comments, debate?
I just want to thank the auditor and our staff for helping us understand this area and for taking good care of our money. So
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to take a vote.
Councilmember Lowing,
Yes.
Chair Tanaka,
Yes.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, so we're gonna, thank you. We're gonna close item 2. Are you guys good? Or shall we take a break? What do you guys?
I'm good. I've been
Okay.
at this since 2:30.
Okay, a trooper here. Okay, so item 3, city council referral to discuss and recommend city protocols, international travel, and other city referrals related to the city council procedures and protocols.
You know, we take public on the last couple items.
Oh, yeah. Good question. Is there any public comment for this item 3, or any of the other items?
We have no members of the public online, and I did not receive any request to speak for item number 2.
Okay, but you're here for item 3, I heard.
Yes.
Okay, so you have to give her a card.
Yep.
Okay,
You have time.
yeah. So, okay, does staff have a presentation on this? Okay,
Thank you, Chair Tanaka, members of the Policy and Services Committee, Chantel Cotton Gaines, Deputy City Manager. This item that's before you today is a couple parts to it. One piece of it is just letting the committee know as a reminder of all of the referrals that were sent to this committee related to your procedures and protocols. We accomplished a lot, and there were these 7 items that were sent to the committee, and that is on packet page 54 that summarizes them. The one in particular that we are highlighting for this evening, and if you answer all the questions on it and get done and want to take on any of the others, you're welcome to. I get a feeling you probably are going to feel comfortable with the one. But nonetheless, the item has been put on the agenda in a way that would allow you to keep going, and we'll do that for any of the other ones that we're bringing to committee, which gives you maximum flexibility. So the item specifically on international travel, as you know, the city has 8 sister cities and 1 sibling city. And it goes back to 1962, I believe, is the longest relationship we've had with Oaxaca, Mexico. And the question that has come up over the years, which actually prompted the insertion of the travel section to be added to your procedures and protocols, was what are we doing related to this travel? And so we have the piece of travel added to the procedures and protocols. We just cleaned it up because it was not entirely answering the questions that we needed. And these last remaining questions are the ones that the council referred to you. So one is, should council member international travel be approved for reimbursement at all? The backstory on that is if a council member does travel to one of our sister cities or sibling city, that's not international. So I'm trying to be inclusive of our sibling city, but the international aspect takes them out. Thank you. If a council member or the mayor does travel to one of our sister cities internationally, typically that is funded by that member of the council or the mayor. But there has been questions from some of, is there a fairness question if someone could not afford it on their own, or if they're traveling as an official city business thing, should it be covered? So that's the first part. And then the second part is, if we are allowing for that travel to have something covered by the city, well, how much should be covered and for whom? Is it just for the mayor? Is it one time? Is it for other council members that travel as well? So that's kind of the breadth of the questions that are coming back from the city council to this committee. And I'll add one small piece, which is also why Neighbors Abroad has representatives here this evening as well, which is the typically when we send a delegation to another one of our sister cities, the sister city may end up covering some piece of the expenses while we're there. That could be travel from the airport to the city. Most of the cities that we're connected to are not your major metropolitan city where the airport is located. So there is some travel that's involved. Usually they will arrange for transportation for our delegation to get from the airport to the actual city, and potentially other expenses while there, food. Some have offered hotel accommodations. It completely varies. Most recently, we have received an inquiry from our French sister city as well as our German sister city of, well, when we send a delegation to Palo Alto, what will the city of Palo Alto cover for their delegations while here? Historically, we have covered through the funding we give to Neighbors Abroad kind of receptions and maybe one meal. Other communities abroad typically will have covered more meals for our delegation when we're there. So I don't know why the question is coming up now, but the question has come up of, well, is there a level of reciprocity that we should be sharing with our sister cities of what they can expect when they send a delegation here. Are we covering any of their expenses? If we are covering some of their expenses, what are we covering and for whom in the delegation? So that gives you kind of the breadth of the dialogue that's happening. It does all come back to money at the end of the day, but specifically a policy around what the funding should be. So that is the item that's before you. And again, I know there are some public speakers that happen to be from Neighbors Abroad that have some information they would like to share as well.
Is this question only about neighbors abroad or any kind of international travel?
That's exactly
Amy.
what I was gonna ask, because when we think about COP and some of the climate stuff and people might go to, world summits on climate.
It could be
that's-
any.
Yeah, I think it should be broader.
That's a very good question. I phrased it in terms of the sister cities because that comes up more often. But yes, the question of council member travel internationally is covering anything international.
Okay.
Great question.
Do you have the, or I don't know if it's relevant to have the current policy manual text just for context, or, just see where it fits in, what kind of language we're
I do. And
ultimately gonna need to refer back to council.
I do, and I can get that with the
Well
clerk so she can share it. It right now, it can fit anywhere in that section 4 of the protocols document, but I'll have her pull it up.
Okay, I thought it might just help us speed our articulation later. Thank you.
So you spent a lot of time talking about international travel. But there's 1 through 7 on this page here. Is the intent for us to go through 1 through 7 tonight? Or you want to focus just purely on international travel?
Great question. So we are, for all of the referrals that came from council for your procedures and protocols handbook, we're going to highlight one of them as your primary topic today. That's international travel.
Okay.
And then if you have an appetite, we'll go as far as you
Okay.
want on the rest of the list.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, great. And so if you could do this, if the clerk could capture some of the things that was said by staff of things that they want kind of our opinion on, that'd be great so that we have some sort of outline. And in the meantime, if the public, you guys submitted a card already, right? If you can call them and run through the cards, that'd be awesome.
Our first speaker is Edward Fike, and he does have a presentation, so I'll be screen sharing. One moment.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, everybody. As Ms. Yu said, I am Ed Fike and I am president-elect of Neighbors Abroad. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chair Tanaka. Thank you, committee, for listening to us tonight. We have a very brief presentation on Neighbors Abroad, who we are, and then we'll follow it up with a proposal for council, for the committee. Let's start with the Neighbors Abroad mission. If you could pull up the slide. That's the second slide. And I will just read that. Neighbors Abroad fosters Palo Alto's domestic and international engagement through friendship, education, commerce, and sustainability. Next slide, please. So we are a small but very spirited nonprofit consisting of 15 active board members, 1 part-time staff administrator, and 1 part-time bookkeeper. We correspond with city governments, we host delegations, and we develop engaging programs for 8 international sister cities and 1 domestic sibling city. We love serving as citizen diplomats when we go abroad, but we also take special pride showing off Palo Alto when visiting delegations come here. Next slide, please. So how do we benefit Palo Alto? Actually, in a number of ways. A primary benefit that Neighbors Abroad provides is economic development. We bring business to Palo Alto. We provide links between local and international businesses through our partners like the Nordic Innovation House and the German Accelerator. Both are right around the corner. You could walk there from here. In the past year alone, we have hosted 4 delegations. Each one has brought increased revenue and foot traffic to Palo Alto businesses. And without fail, These visitors post favorably on social media, and they return home with raves about Palo Alto, encouraging future tourism. Next slide, please. Another benefit where we really shine is student exchange. It's one of our core initiatives. We open students' eyes to the world. We provide Palo Alto's youth with the opportunity to learn new languages and appreciate cultural differences by hosting long-time exchanges with Japan, Mexico, and France. We're especially proud to have co-sponsored a student essay contest last year in honor of a World War II hero, Pastor Overdine, who saved the lives of hundreds of Jews in our sister city of Enschede. This summer, these contest winners from Palo Alto and Bloomington, Indiana, will be visiting Enschede in a program co-facilitated by Neighbors Abroad. Next slide, please. We are very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we participate in local events that celebrate the countries of our sister cities, including last summer's International Festival. We're especially aware that some of the groups we support are not well represented in civic life. And so what we do is we provide them a voice in the community. And next slide, please. Finally, Neighbors Abroad engages in sustainability initiatives that create a better environment for Palo Alto and the world. Examples include our carbon offset program in Oaxaca and last month's climate summit hosted right here at City Hall, which allowed visitors from the Nordic region to trade best practices.
Sorry to interrupt you. Your 3 minutes is up.
Oh, that was last sentence.
Well, it's a finish. If the
I
chair
really was
will
on my
allow.
last sentence.
If the chair will allow, then.
Thank you so much. It allowed visitors from the Nordic region to trade best practices with local experts to combat climate change. So that's my introduction. Yes, with Jeanette.
Right.
Our
Thank
next speaker
you.
is Jeanette. Oh, Jeanette.
Yeah, Jeanette, Jeanette Kiesling. Hi, thank you very much for your time this evening, council members and Chairman Tanaka. And thank you, Ed, for giving us this overview of what Neighbors Abroad brings to the table, our programs and our role in the sister city relationships. We are in a unique situation here in Palo Alto because whereas other sister and sibling cities are city-led and funded, in Palo Alto, it's mainly Neighbors Abroad, which administers these relationships with our sister and sibling cities. So the benefit, of course, of all of this is that eliminates some staff, some city staffing, and some program-related expenses. If you will, we volunteers are doing a lot of the work of these sister city and sibling city relationships. We receive some funding for our efforts through the annual contract for administrative services between the city and Neighbors Abroad. However, the city requires us to spend 70%, so of the $30,000, 70%, $21,000 of these funds on program administration. This leaves very little for, or very small sum for delegation visits. The majority of our donations that we also do some fundraising, are pledged to our humanitarian efforts. For example, our Ukrainian Children's Fund, which brought in over $100,000, which we gave one-to-one to Ukraine. And despite our volunteer efforts to reduce the expenses, the cost of entertaining our delegations is a very significant amount for our small nonprofit. So actually, I have all of this on a slide. I should have told you that we should continue on, and we're kind of through this now, so we can go to the next one, right? So our quest to you tonight is to agree on a modest annual stipend of up to $20,000, which would be allocated toward reasonable meal, entertainment, and other expenses for visiting sister and sibling city delegations. And that is important on a reimbursement basis. So we're not asking for the money up front. We're asking you to reimburse us if and only if we have these expenses. For clarity, this allowance shall be in addition to the annual contract on administrative services between the city and neighbors abroad. And as Chantal has pointed out, occasionally, and this is the second question we would like to get your guidance on, occasionally, the delegations from Palo Alto have accepted complimentary lodging, for example, from sister cities. I'm in my last sentence. If I could finish that, would that be okay? So which has created some expectations of reciprocity. And we kindly request your guidance on whether this lodging would be further accepted.
Okay, great. Thank you for your comments. Can the clerk please bring up the document with the things from staff of the questions that we wanted to answer? And so what I propose to my colleagues is that we have this kind of longish list of questions of what do we want to support or not. Maybe what we could do is I didn't do exact count, but it seems like there's like 6 or 7 questions you asked. And so maybe what we could do first, just as a process of elimination, is for the ones that you guys want to say yes to or want to have discussion on, we will talk about those, and the rest we assume the answer is no. Okay, so can you bring up the list of questions? Just international travel, yeah. No, not yet. We're going to cover that, yeah. 5 questions. Okay, can you bring up the 5 questions? And so as you guys see the questions, if there's any one of those 5 questions or any more, any of them, just we'll say something and then we'll discuss those. And the ones that none of us want to talk about, the answer is basically no.
Meanwhile, can I ask a procedural question?
Sure.
While you're writing up your questions? The 30,000 you get is through administrative services. So Kylie, they're asking for essentially another 20,000 for different kind of purposes. Wouldn't that be a different committee than us, i.e. finance and then budgeting?
Yeah.
Because that would just be sort of an incremental request above the 30, it seems to me.
That's correct. So that would be through the budget process. We will be taking up the proposed budget with the finance committee on May 5th, with the study session at the city council on May 1st.
Okay, thanks.
And also just to clarify, I know she said for administrative, but it's not through the administrative services department. The city manager's office manages the contract for Neighbors Abroad, but it is paying for admin support for Neighbors Abroad.
Okay, I see there are 4. Were there other questions? I thought you read off a few other questions, I think. What's missing?
They're all sort of if-then type of questions.
Okay, so can you just mention this so that she could write it and we could see all of them?
Well, I think this is a basis enough for your conversation.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
If you say yes to one of the questions, then it's
Okay.
add some specificity essentially.
Okay. So for my colleagues then, so I guess look at lines 5, 6, and 8. And if any one of them you guys want to chat about, say so, and we'll chat about it. And if there's none of them that we want to chat about, basically the answer is no. So that'll save us time in terms of eliminating some of these topics. So
5, it seems like we need to talk about that.
okay, 5, okay.
I mean, it seems, so this is should council member international travel be approved for reimbursement?
Yeah, okay, so we'll talk about 5. So maybe just maybe highlight yellow. So we'll talk about 5 and then, sorry, go ahead.
So my question is, I think as a threshold matter, is there a reason to separate out 6? Is there like.
Okay, well, let's highlight 5, let's highlight 6. Okay. Okay, you guys good then with this list?
I'd like to talk about, them both.
5 and 6, okay.
And
And then-
Councilmember Vinker, actually on number 8, the one I think you're asking about, should the
I
city,
wasn't asking. about
oh,
that.
I'm sorry, you were asking about 5 and 6, the combination of Sister
I
City
mean,
versus.
Arguably, if we were to say yes to 5, why would we treat 6 differently? That's what I was trying to say.
Okay.
Fair.
Okay. So we're talking about 5 and 6. And it sounds like 8, no one has to talk about it. So we're not talking about 8. And then there's another one, 10. Oh, second, do you want to change your mind? Do you want to talk about
No,
eight? too?
I just wanted to note that on 8, um, while I very much appreciate the inclusivity of sibling cities throughout here, that I think the referral from council was for international. So I like the way you have written 8, and I think we have to limit tonight's discussion to the international sister cities. And also then we can avoid any questions of my recusal as well.
Okay, okay. So we're not going to talk about number 8. Okay. Number 10. Anyone want to talk about number 10? Or should we skip it and just focus on 5 and 6?
Is that within the scope of what was referred to us?
I don't
Are we
know.
allowed to do that?
Maybe
Because we were supposed to be
that's
talking
true.
about.
Maybe it's
international
not.
travel.
Okay.
I just don't know. I mean, not that I don't want us to address it
Yeah,
at
yeah.
some
It may
point.
not be
I'm just
agendized.
not sure it's
Yeah.
agendized.
Okay.
for tonight.
Okay.
Seems like that could also be part of the request to the finance committee.
That's what I was going to recommend, since that links to maybe the Neighbors Abroad request as well, that maybe that's something that can be sent to the budget process.
Okay. So we're going to focus then tonight on 5, 6, and maybe 7, because 7 is a subset of 6, right? Okay, good. So we have our work cut out for us. Okay, so let's start with 5. And so for 5, who wants to start first in terms of why we should do it? Just jump in.
Yeah, so I think there's obviously differences in why a council member would need to take an international trip. So that has to be evaluated, and there has to be approval process, just like in a company. But I certainly see situations in which, for what Councilmember Vinker just mentioned, for example, a climate summit that's in Paris, and if that's a valid thing for us to be involved in, then it's effectively a business expense and should be covered. Shouldn't be, particularly at our salaries, 25% of our annual salary to take a business trip on behalf of the city. So in terms of policy wise, I think it's yes. Which ones are valid and which ones aren't would have to be evaluated more in detail. Is it, something as simple as there's a proposal that, someone is appointed by the mayor or gets approval by the mayor to represent the city, and that's all it takes, maybe. But that would be my starting point on this one.
Okay, so just to be clear to the clerk, we're going to focus first on 5, and then we'll talk about 6. And so at 5, if I was to summarize my colleagues' reason why it's a pro is because it's a legitimate business expense for that person to go. So I think is that a good summary?
Yes, and it shouldn't be borne by that council member.
Okay. Do you have any? And you can also talk about cons too, if you want. You can also talk about. We're talking about 5, so we talk about the pros and cons. So you could, if you want to talk about any cons, you can also do that.
Well, the cons is it costs the city money.
Okay. So put that down for the clerk. Okay. So
which means we
It's
have
an
to be
investment, Ed.
I know, which means we have to be, constrained in how many trips are taken.
okay.
Again, typical company kind of policy.
Okay. Sure. Go ahead.
I just don't see any reason that we would exclude international travel from something that's reimbursable. I think we have to have, criteria for both domestic and international travel as to it should be, of benefit to the city. It should be an appropriate business expense. I think the criteria here are key, but I don't think to drawing a line at our borders is the right thing to do.
Okay. So okay, I'll give my thoughts. So first of all, I think the pro and cons you guys mentioned are to me are correct. I also like the idea of the criteria. So is it some boondoggle of a conference? Is that a legitimate business expense, or is it something where it's essential that the city actually have representation there, or someone learns something? So I think the criteria actually matters a lot. But international travel is pretty expensive, and Zoom is pretty good these days. So I guess maybe Councilmember, I don't know if you can maybe can you sketch out a potential criteria that might be appropriate for us to consider?
I guess what I'd like to know is what we're currently using for domestic travel, because it seems to me it should basically be the same. I mean, the point is it costs more to go to, Boston than it does to Stockton. So we would always want to balance the cost reward ratio. And I just think it's no different for international. So I would look to say, what do we do now for domestic, if anything? But I think it should be similar.
Okay, can you create, just to create some space for us on the sheet, can you create some extra lines of maybe some extra rows below 5 of, base it off of the domestic criteria? Is that basically what you're saying?
Well, I think we at least want to know what that is, so we can say, is it all transferable? Would we want to tweak it for any particular reason? I can't, it doesn't strike me what that would be, but I'd just like to look at it to
Okay.
the extent we have it.
To that point, Chair and Councilmember Vinker, you do not have a policy on domestic. So while I think it is a great idea to link them, you would also need to create that as well.
Okay.
So that's the real question here is, when is it appropriate to, without over legislating it, what would we say is appropriate? I guess, so if the question is not before us as to what exactly, or just setting aside for the moment what exactly those criteria are. And when I look at question 5, should it be approved for reimbursement? I think my question is, why shouldn't it? Why should it be different? And I don't think it should be. So I think it should be approved. I would like to see us have some basic criteria, but has it been in the discretion of whom? The mayor, whose discretion is it to expend money for domestic travel?
It just gets budgeted.
Yeah, that's correct. And usually council members work with the city clerk's office on interest in conferences or any travel that they wish to organize. And so that's typically done by council members with the city clerk's office.
So I guess I'm trying to figure out the authority for saying yes or no, because there may be a budgeted pot of money, but we don't budget by conference, do we?
No, you don't budget by
Right,
conference. So typically what will happen is council members will articulate to the city clerk's office a desire to travel. The city clerk's office will look at whether or not there's enough budget for that travel within the existing appropriations. If not, the city clerk will typically alert us, and we will identify how much is remaining in the council contingent account, and then we'll make the mayor and vice mayor aware of that funding need.
So you're telling me I should hurry up and get my request in before council member Lowing? Is that?
I already put mine in this afternoon.
Oh no, I'm too late.
So typically, and I think you all know, we've used council contingent funds to support council member travel. And then that email does go out to all council members, and through your new council policies and procedures, you have some additional guidelines on the use of contingent funds.
I think the simplest way to do it, at least as a first take, is kind of what I said before, is we should come up with, the mayor can approve it, but we have to come up, I would think we would want to come up with a recommendation to the finance committee or the council about how much would that be in a given year. So that we can come up with, that's the deal. And then the mayor knows how much she or he is spending, and then we go from there.
Okay, actually, just to keep this organized, can the clerk, because there's no domestic travel, so can the clerk just add a couple extra lines? So one is come up with the criteria, because there is no criteria. And the second idea that the council member came up with is have it pre-budgeted. Is that what you're saying? Have some sort of, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So can you add another line? So basically, there should be a pre-approved budget for the travel. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
but yes, and piling on to what Kylie said before, for example, when the new council members went to the League of Cities meeting, that didn't have to go through the mayor, that went through the city manager, because there was already budget for things like that. And it was completely city clerk, basically.
Yeah, I just wanted to note for on the clerk's end, we, as council members request to go to conferences or whatnot, travel, we typically just look at the budget to see if it fits. But we also don't necessarily track how often the council members travel and how much. So there's no limit to each council member at this point.
So to help guide this conversation, I think really what staff is looking for is and the referral to this body is developing, what is that policy? What is the policy that the council, you as a committee recommend that the council institute as the criteria or objectives that travel should be your travel requests as council members should be evaluated upon. The council, as part of your PNP review, already asked staff to include in the budget a restoration of the council's travel budget in alignment with pre-COVID levels. So I do know, I don't remember the exact number, but I want to say we did include, I think the difference was like $30,000. So in this FY 2024 budget, I do think we fixed that. That's brought forward as will be brought forward as a recommendation based on council's direction already. So really tonight, I think what we're seeking is your feedback or ultimately your recommendation to the council on what is that criteria. So if a request comes in, if it's not first come, first serve or necessarily a dollar value thing, what are those things? Does it need to be in alignment with an association that the city is part of? Does it need to be in alignment with one of the 4 council priorities, or could it be something else? Does it need to be, what are those criteria in which you would want your travel requests to be evaluated against?
And then there's also the question, which I guess maybe you want to get to later in terms of the amount. Right, so should we put a hold on that for now?
No, I think what we should do is we should be very generous here, list all the ideas that people have, and then we could talk about it, whether we actually want to support it or not. But you could go ahead and put it down so that we could consider it.
Well, I guess I was wondering, just as a benchmark, what the domestic one was, because arguably it would be, to your point, a little larger if we're starting to now cover additional travel. I don't know that we want to do that at the expense, so to speak, of domestic travel. In other words, I don't know that we necessarily want to curtail that. But obviously we don't want to be jet setting around the world on the taxpayer's dime for no particular reason. So I guess, the basic criteria is that it would advance the city's interests, be they economic or other that we could think about.
Okay, can you list that to advance the city's
interest, e.g. economic, or policy objectives, and I'm thinking of COP here in particular. So, and then I might say, e.g., council priorities. So this year we have the 4. So if it's going to advance one or both of those, and then we would have to, what I wonder though is whether we should set up, I don't want to encumber it too much, but I wonder whether we should have some sense of, we don't want to if we take the mayor and vice mayor out of it for a moment, because there's some special duties, ceremonial things that come along with that. For the other 5, I don't think we want just one person running around and the rest of us can't. So there should be some sense of rotation, distribution amongst the remaining council members. I don't exactly know how to articulate that. And we might even say over the course of 2 years, because we're all, the same group, same 7 is here for at least 2 years. And it might just be timing wise and planning wise. It's not just year by year, but over the course of 2 years, or that the budget would be equitably distributed amongst council members.
Okay.
Something like
Can
that.
you list the rotation 2 years on there? Also, feel free to jump in if you have ideas.
I will, but she was working on a good list. I didn't want to slow down her momentum there. See, that's what I was talking about, Greg. The one thing I was going to put in there so that there's some sort of rails on this, I'm not quite sure I could kind of design this on the fly, but it might be something like, where attending by Zoom, means you can't get what we need out of it. It's sort of like, of course, we're not just looking to put people on planes, but if that's really, a functional interaction for 5 days, you can't sit on a Zoom screen. So some phrase to that extent, so we know that there's some constraints there.
A good example of that, Ed, might be certain conferences where you're asked to present, and it raises the city's profile for a variety of reasons. And sometimes you can present on Zoom, but oftentimes you need to be there to accept the speaking engagement.
So I think the last one is Zoom doesn't cut it. I don't know. Okay, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe change 10 to Zoom doesn't cut it. Okay. Well, what was the last one you were thinking about?
On the other hand, this another thing that came up that's pretty interesting here is that, if we were going to accept an award in Paris, it's not necessary that somebody has to fly there for 10 minutes to get the award. So, that's another kind of nuance that we should be noting.
Right, but if there were attendant meetings that could promote, other objectives or economic benefit to the city that are there because you're getting the award, then it might be. If it's just as good on Zoom, then it's not. So I think it's very circumstance specific. So I think it's back to if Zoom doesn't cut it.
Yeah, so can you change 10 to Zoom is not effective? Zoom is not effective. Okay.
And
sorry, go ahead.
One other one that we have toyed around with, even just in the sister city realm, is the frequency by which the visits are useful. So, for example, if we do go to one of the conferences or a sister city in year 2020, we shouldn't need to go back again for at least a few years. So that's something that kind of helps. And if we go back, it needs to be obviously merited, but just like a recommendation of maybe 5 years or something in between, just as a possibility for something to consider. That's more relevant in the sister city realm, but just throwing that out there.
Yeah, something like consecutive annual visit is not recommended.
Yeah, so maybe spacing between visits or something like that to make it a little bit more
Visits to any one city will be reasonably spaced.
Okay, yeah.
Figure out what reasonable means, but clearly it's not every quarter.
Is it city or conference, Vicky?
City or conference.
Yeah, because it could be moving around from.
Yeah, I think in the context of sister cities, I was thinking, that we wouldn't want to just do too much with one, but on the other hand, I think it also applies to conferences, maybe. Some of them are annual, so.
And they move around from city to city.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I think I withdraw or conference. I think it's all just, again, I think that's baked into the city's interests and policies / council objectives.
Okay. And any other ideas, suggestions, thoughts? Otherwise, I'm going to start adding some stuff. So, I want to make sure you guys kind of exhausted your ideas here.
Yeah, it's hard to try to get in, again, as in business, it's hard to kind of get in the value of the meeting, the kind of return on investment. You can't do that calculation. Well, it's okay if it costs 1,500, but not if it's 3,000. It's just, there's no way to get that, but we hope that the decision maker is taking that into account.
Perhaps you could say something like consideration of, value of the trip with versus the cost to be incurred.
Cost value relationship.
Yeah, cost value. And if you use something qualifying like consideration of, then it's not going to dictate, but it would be something that you could consider.
You should add that one. Consideration of cost value relationship.
I think one that you should add, I think it was something that I forgot who mentioned. I think actually you mentioned it, Councilmember, was or I forgot someone mentioned about the total, like there's a total. Oh, actually no, it was Councilmember, I think mentioned an overall budget. There's some sort of budget amount for this. How much that is, we have to probably debate, but that's one I think Councilmember you mentioned, right?
I think we both did actually, but it's sort of we need to put a budget number in there.
Yeah. Okay. So
I said we should recommend to the finance.
Yeah, so that's maybe a line number 13 is total budget amount. Okay. Anything else that's missing from this list?
The answer is probably yes, it's missing from this list, but
okay. So so let's so now that we have a list here, I think what we should do is debate it, right? To see which one makes sense, which one doesn't, and maybe there's other ideas that come out of this. And so I think actually 6 we can almost get rid of because we've in our discussion kind of come up 7 through 13, which is essentially okay. So let's just delete 6 because we have now a straw man of a criteria. Okay, so let's talk about the first one. Pre-approved budget for travel. Okay, does anyone want to debate this in terms of pros or cons?
And you're saying a collective budget by this, right? Not
No, the
per
collective
trip?
budget is 12.
Oh, so
We
this
have-
is like
we-
per,
This is
trip?
what Councilmember Allowing was saying earlier, which is there should be some sort of not a blank check, but some cap on the
I think I was talking about the total amount.
Oh, okay.
I think I was talking about what is now 12.
Oh,
but
okay. Oh, sorry.
I have,
Sorry, I misunderstood.
I have no problem with an estimate for 6.
Okay, so
Because if someone's going to approve this, they need to know what they're approving.
yeah, that's what I thought you meant. So
And that does align with staff policy. So anytime staff wants to request travel, there is a pre-travel process where you're requesting from your supervisor pre-approval, estimated cost, the value of that trip. So I think perhaps that's what this could translate to. The question would be who would be reviewing that and approving that.
No, I like that, because I think, I think that perhaps when we made that trip to Sacramento, we used your form and I saw all that stuff and I just thought it applied to us too. So, but there could certainly be some good guidance there. But it's, but sometimes guidance is around, you don't fly first class, you know, that kind of thing, as opposed to a number, because if you're going to, you know, Canada versus Taipei, I mean, it's going to be very
Sure.
different.
So, and I think what we're talking about are criteria of how you want to govern choosing when and when not to travel and your process for it. If the council already had agreed to what I think you've seen when you did the Sacramento travel, which is our administrative policy for travel, which has all of those guidelines like don't fly first class, choose the most economical way to get there. Did you get the hotel, conference rate, government rate, those kinds of things. So those kind of administrative policies, for lack of a better term, we did recommend that the council just follow what we follow staff for. I think with maybe a limited exception.
And you adopted that in what we did on
Yeah.
Monday.
So you already did that. So that's
We don't
perfect.
need to do that.
So I think what this is doing is just saying that part of your evaluation as council members for travel would be that you do go through a pre-approval process, a pre-travel request process. That's what line 6 I would interpret to say. And I think the outstanding question, if that is something you choose to adopt as part of your criteria, is who would be the approver of that.
okay, does anyone want to speak on this line 6 here?
Well, I think if I understood you right, we're not pre-approving the budget. That is in adherence to the council, to the guidelines we approved Monday night. We're pre-approving the fact of travel, like the decision that this is worth it.
Correct. So I think the pre-travel authorization request helps clarify that.
Yeah, so we should delete the budget in that line 6.
And-
Because we're the total budget we're going to deal with in line 12.
And as additional context on the pre-approval, so there was one line that links to this that is in your procedures and protocols handbook, and the updated one that says council member travel will be approved by the mayor. And so if there's a recommendation for someone else to do it, that would just need to be in your recommendation with your criteria.
Okay, any other discussion on this? Thoughts? Okay, so so we could vote all these like one by one, or we could just keep going and then assume that if there's no real debate on it, that we're okay with it. That sound good?
One other option could be that we could treat this as sort of just amongst ourselves, a first reading, and think about it some more until the next meeting, and then say, hey, I had one more or two more ideas for that.
Okay, I'm okay with that. Are you?
I'm okay with it. I think there's some slight wording issue in line 8, because I think it's not 2 years between each council member. I think it's that there will be, rotation amongst council members so that travel is distributed equally over the course of 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. So the 2 years should kind of go at the end. Yeah, so that's fine. I should just move the of to.
Yeah, it was kind of confusing the number 10 there, which stands on its
rotation
own.
among council members.
Let's just walk through this list and then have your edits ready for each of the items as we go. So 7, any thoughts, questions about 7?
I might suggest we add economic in there, just say advance the city's interest, and you could even like comma, e.g. economic. Just because I think that's a key one, and it, hopefully could pay us back. I think it's a key example to cite.
Yeah, actually, I almost feel like it should be IE, right, instead of EG, right?
I think there's certain maybe indirect economic benefits, but cultural benefits and things sometimes are in the city's good interest as well. So I'd hate to limit it exclusively to provable economic interest, even though I think that's typically what it would be.
From a sister cities perspective, if I can add a little context, there are a few buckets that we have viewed sister city relationships from. Cultural is one of them. So cultural, economic, and what's the third one? Environmental. So those have and culture includes art.
So the clerk, we might have to split this one because we may have a disagreement. So maybe just add another line and then we'll talk about economic. Okay. Okay, anything else on 7? Okay, let's go to okay, let's debate about the economic. So Palo Alto is a domestic city, right? Obviously, and not a very big city geographically. And with how good Zoom is these days, I think the bar has to be really high for us to travel, even domestically. And so I think if it's economic, right? If we could say there's an economic benefit, that at least covers the cost of the trip, then it's pretty easy to justify. And I think you guys know the economic environment we're in right now. Meta ahead with the 4th round of layoffs. We heard First Republic Bank's teetering. So I just feel that we need to be very sensitive to the public's money. But anyway, so I think for the clerk, maybe separate out this is economics. I'm not sure my colleagues necessarily agree with me on this one. So, but you guys are welcome to debate me on it.
Yeah, I would take a different position because I think, for example, the COP climate summit is a good example. I think that you could make an argument that it's in our economic interest because the green economy is strong. We're known for it. I think whereas we're a small city, we are internationally known. We probably have the most outsized reputation of almost any city on the planet, given our population and how much people know about us. And thus we're leaders, and we're particularly leaders in the climate realm. And I think if we go there, first of all, that's one of our values. Our residents appreciate it. It's a council priority, but it can pay us back economically. For one, just because taking care of our earth and our climate reduces expenses of dealing with climate change, but it also can more directly attract green business, green tech. So I can't say that we go to that conference and we immediately get business, but I think it's in the city's best interest for a variety of reasons.
Okay, I don't know if the clerk's able to capture some of the pros and cons talked about, and I think we should actually split out the economic one because I think we're going to have a different opinion on that one. Yeah, just the IE economic, just drop it down to 8. And you could put the pros and cons. I don't know if you want to weigh in on 7 at all.
The problem with, I know I'd like to get return on investment for our travel anywhere, domestic included. And sometimes you don't know if that's coming this week or in the next decade. So it's a little bit subjective to call. I would be less excited about someone who said, let's just go to a city and explore their history and dance with them and stuff like that. That sounds like an interesting vacation. So that's where the judgment's going to have to come in terms of who gets to approve this or not. So if it was just sort of purely experiencing that city and coming home and making a report to council and the citizens, I wouldn't be excited about that. To just restrict it to the word economic is also a little bit too restrictive. So I'm kind of in the middle there.
I think the economic is by nature of what we're talking about here is not quantifiable. It's going to be, it seems like it's going to be able to have some sort of payback, but we're not going to give the exact dollar figure. I think that's too hard, even for companies in private sector. It's too hard to do. So I don't think we could do that. I think it's more that that we could point to the stakeholders of the city that this could have some payback later on, maybe a little bit squishy, but at least we could justify it versus saying, oh yeah, we just did this big boondoggle and went to Nice and we went to the beach type thing, right? So so that's what I'm thinking about in terms of economic, not a hard figure, because I think that's not possible.
Yeah, but you could go to, say, I don't know what city to pick, Vancouver. That's kind of cheating because it's on, but you could go to North American Conference on affordable housing. And you could end up with a lot of people saying, I've got ways to build it cheaper. I'm an investor in that.
Yeah, but that's economic, but that's economic.
That's what I'm saying.
You could
That's what I'm
justify that then.
saying.
Yeah. So I think we're on the same page. I'm not talking about like a super hard, we got 42% economic benefit. I don't think that's possible.
Yeah, I think the problem is that when you put the word in there, you end up doing exactly what we're doing, fighting about what is economic and what is
Yeah,
not.
that's fair. That's
And
fair.
I think that if you don't have some very good reason to do city travel, you're going to pay a heck of a price publicly because it's going to be transparent. We're going to have Dave Price writing about us. I mean, like, I just think that, we've seen it in other cities, right? The boondoggle language is out there. And so I think there's a huge disincentive to abuse this. But I think to debate, I think it's most typically going to be economic, but things like marketing trips, is there an immediate economic benefit? Maybe, maybe not. I just would rather avoid debating it. I also think there is a lot of value in raising the city's profile. And I think there's value in cultural relationships that just help our economy run more smoothly. And so it's all interrelated, and I'd rather not end up debating what is expressly economic.
Okay, so one idea that I have, I'm not sure it's going to solve it, which is maybe line 14, which is we publish our trips on our website so the public can see. They price, they know, like, and we say what we're going to do it for. And so members of the public could see like where we're going and how much we're spending. And if the public thinks it's a boondoggle, we will pay for it, right? Sorry, you want to say something? Oh, okay, no problem. Okay. Okay, great. We'll talk about 14 later, but that's just one idea. Okay, anything else on 7 or 8? Otherwise, we'll move to 9.
On 8, which is the rotation one.
No, that's 9. That's 9.
Oh, that's 9. Never mind.
Okay, yeah. So actually, I think the pro for the economic is we could justify the spend, right? I think that's the pro. The con is restrictive, and maybe we're going to spend too much time debating what it's worth, right? So I think that's the con. Okay, 9. Okay, who wants to talk about 9?
I just want to change the word equally to equitably.
Okay, do you want to talk about 9?
Yeah, I just want to say that I don't think it should be strict or a rotation. If, for example, it turns out 2 years from now, Vicky's our primary climate guru, I wouldn't want to say somebody who is not interested in climate particularly. I can't imagine who that would be, but because it's their turn, they should go. So, I don't think we need to be too strict about it. And I'm not sure the language is too strict right now. I'm just saying.
I think that actually, I think of them as the same concepts. And so I think if we just said it's distributed equitably among council members, that implies a rotation of some sort on a makes sense basis. So I would argue that we should say distributed equitably among council members.
I'm good with that. Do you want to modify that, Clerk, to say that? Do they have rotation in there, or you're just okay? Okay. Okay. Okay, great. Okay. Okay, let's close on 9. Let's have a 10. Okay. Anyone want to talk about that?
That sentence is pretty effective, Greg.
Okay.
Okay. Councilmember Tanaka, you might want to just change Zoom to virtual, since it may not be.
We would change it even.
Okay. Yeah. Right now we're not trying to get a motion going. We're just trying to get rough ideas together. Okay, so, okay, 11. Anyone want to talk about 11? Okay, okay, 12. Anyone want to talk about 12? Okay, okay, 13. So we got to talk about 13. So what is the thought? Okay, how much do we spend right now on domestic?
I'll look to Mehana if she knows. I will say, knowing that your prior budget was about, was less than 30,000, because we did inflate it a little bit for inflation. My guess is you're not spending more than that a year. Obviously, that's very historical, because I know that you are not spending that over the last 3 years, since no one's been going anywhere.
Okay, so so I think the question here is, should we just take the domestic budget and split it among domestic and international, or should the overall travel budget be increased? And if so, how much? So I don't know if my colleagues have thoughts about, 13 here.
My first thought is if it's been 30, maybe we take it up to 40 and say that's both.
Okay, thoughts?
I'm fine with that. I was gonna say 45, but I'm good with 40. I
That's fine.
think that really this is gonna be for the finance committee ultimately, because, we don't have the context of the overall budget, but I would like to see it increased by some amount, and I'm fine with that.
45 is okay too.
Okay, well, I'm in the opposite direction. I just feel I think we should keep it at 30. So, we'll probably have to disagree on this one.
So,
But-
council members, one thing for you to consider is that should you need additional funding, you could look to use your contingent account. That's one of the reasons it's there. That's an annual allocation of $125,000.
Okay.
So you do have the 30,000, or approximately 30,000, I think, in terms of your baseline. But you could always draw on that. That's what we've done this year, frankly, since you didn't even have a travel budget.
And in the new handbook you adopted on Monday, you did update the expenditures for city council contingency funds process. So there's 2 notes that I want to point out here. So you're saying, in your updated policy, you have requests for expenditures of council contingency funds up to $10,000. Should be made by the mayor and vice mayor. And then there's a process you included for if council members disagree. And then expenditures over $10,000 would require an action by a city council motion. So that's in there. One of the other referrals that you do have on your list of referrals from council on your handbook is the notion of the additional allocation of some of the contingency funds to each council member to use, how the council member may see fit. So I just wanted to offer those 2 things because they are kind of relevant to the dollar amounts you're discussing here.
Okay, so
I think just one other thing on this. I think by definition, we have to come up from 30 to something, even if it's only 35, because basically we're opening up a situation where no longer do council members have to pay for it out of their pocket. And if we're going to authorize travel, that's more than what we've been doing. So, I mean, even if it's 35, that's sort of in the right direction.
well, I guess my only thought is that we just travel less domestically, right? So we trade off what cities we go to. Maybe we don't go to Kansas, we go to
I'm okay with that.
Stockton, right, or wherever it is.
I guess I have a slightly different view because I don't think this is redistributing the pie. I think this is increasing the pie because some of the things we do domestically, like the conference that trained us as new council members, I found very valuable. And I wouldn't want to carve that back. And so if we have had a mayor who's been paying out of his own pocket to go do some of these international trips that we think are valuable, and we then have a mayor who can't, I wouldn't want to see us not do that. So I think that inherently necessitates we increase it by some amount if we do want to pay for international travel. And I think we should.
Okay, so we're probably gonna have to split this one. You guys are probably gonna outvote me. So you guys should, if it's not too high, I might agree, but if it's a lot more, I would not agree. So I don't know if you guys want to talk about that now, like what figure you guys are thinking.
I would stick with 40, because
I would too.
So let's list 40 on this one. Okay, then let's go to 14. 14, anyone, oh, actually, I'll talk about that. So, yeah, I think it's actually, sunshine is a really great disinfectant, right? It's a great way to justify. And if one of us goes on a trip and it's not really justifiable, it looks like a total boondoggle, this lets the public know, right? Provides transparency. So I think, actually, I like the idea you suggested. So that's why it's here. Anyone want to talk more about, 14?
I would rather see this afterwards to report on action as opposed to just sort of prevent whistleblowers, say, Councilmember X just returned from the climate action conference in Paris and reported such and such and such and such. So it seems to be more productive that way when you're reporting on.
Oh, I see. So report it, have it reported when the person comes back.
Yeah.
Versus before. Oh, okay. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Now we could say, what did you do there, right? So, yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Not just
I like
I'm
the idea.
going on a trip.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Here,
Yeah.
here's what the outcomes were.
Yeah, okay.
And referring back to the policy procedures document you adopted on Monday, there is a piece in there where you are supposed to report back. It hasn't historically been done very much. So that is something that came up in discussion of just using maybe even the council member comments and announcements section of your agenda, using that to report something just like what council member Lowing just referred to.
So I guess what I'm saying though is I like what he's saying, but I think it's important that we publish our expenses for this so that people can see what happened, right? So it's a really good transparency. And they could see what was said, like, okay, we did this, that, or whatever, right? But sorry, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say that I really like where this is going, that I would like to see it in the form of a reminder to council members to report out after trips at our council meetings, during member updates. Perhaps there's an informational item at the bottom of the packet about where we went and what we did. I think you would suggest that the dollar amount should be there. I think it's available if people want to come get it. I don't know if we want to put it there, but we could put a total amount. I think, and since those are posted on the website, it's inherently on the website. I don't know that we want a special area for it. I think that makes too big of a deal out of it. But if it, maybe there's just some sort of addendum that, Councilmember Lowing went to Topeka to find out about affordable housing and, or something.
Yeah, I concur with your approach as you've outlined it there. I don't think we want to, the point of doing it is we're making a judgment that it's worthwhile for the city. And the way to get that across to the citizens, and they can make a judgment on it themselves, is to report what happened and what we did. So the price of the plane ticket isn't really that relevant.
Okay.
And I don't see creating a whole area of the website to report on this because it's only going to happen twice a year. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. So I think we're all in violent agreement on this one as well. So 14, I think we're good. So maybe what we could do now is we could turn this into a motion for this part, and then, or should we go to 16 first? What do you guys think? Want to try to cover everything under 5, or do you guys have anything else that you want to add?
I just think we all understand that it's inherently on the website, but to the extent, I know we're not crafting the exact language here, but I guess I would want 14 to not be, I would say include council member travel expenses in the report. Yeah, readout, post trip readout or something like, yeah. And then
what are you saying? Include expenses?
A total expense. I agree with you. The plane ticket or the cup of coffee is kind of, not worth it, but sorry, council, I don't know whether to call you Ed or council member in this context, but were you suggesting we not do that?
I was suggesting that that's not really relevant because if you spend 3 days in, we've been talking about Paris or Vancouver, you report on what you did and whether it cost, 2,000 or 3,000 or 1,500, the number is not 20,000. And what you're reporting on is this is the work that got done. So I don't feel like that's something that we want to be publishing because I think it almost makes it, I don't want to say too visible, but it's almost emphasizing the cost as opposed to the benefit. That's kind of my concern.
Well, I think we should publish it. I mean, I agree that the amount probably doesn't make sense, but the total amount I think makes sense, like total amount in days. So public could see that, hey, you didn't see at the Ritz-Carlton for like, 10 days or like, I mean, just so that people get a sense of that we're being responsible with their money. So that's why I think it's important to have the total plus the days. And all the other details probably don't matter. So, I mean, depending on people's feeling, we may have to split this one, but.
Just one thing for suggestion for the committee, you may consider articulating, right, the principle behind this. So what is the ultimate goal? Is it that it's in print? Is it that it is in the public record? And then maybe staff can come back with some more fleshed out opportunities. But if you as a body could at least coalesce on kind of that end goal, that it's on a website or that it's in a packet or something versus it's verbally reported out because you want to make sure that the intentions of the trip or the benefits of the trip have been articulated. We as staff can go back and see if we can't provide in the future some ways to operationalize that for you.
Perhaps we say it's accessible to the public because I think we've agreed that we don't want it on a separate section on the website. I don't think we should have to orally say, oh, and then I spent this much that feels odd. I think what I'm waffling on is Councilmember Tanaka, I think was, I think we were talking about having a report out in the packet, like in the informational part, and then we could talk to it during Councilmember comment period. But in that report out would be the total dollar figure, and he's suggesting days as well. I'm waffling on that because whereas I have no problem with the transparency, I do take Councilmember Lowing's point that it could distract from the good that was done on the trip, the very good accomplishments, that one could report on it. It could be a distraction. So I guess my question, I guess I would say if it's accessible to the public, and I think it probably already is, and you could perhaps confirm that, and perhaps that's enough.
Sure. All of these are public records. So any the public would be able to request any record of council member travel. Perhaps with this, to your point, again, focusing back on the key principle. So some sort of reporting, maybe perhaps some understanding of the frequency in which that reporting happens. Is it desired that it's immediate? Is it an annual thing? Is it a quarterly thing? And then again, we as staff can work, we'll work with the clerk's office and see, is there something, perhaps a process we could already matriculate this into that we're not thinking of? But again, principles of what the end goal is, and we'll work on the details.
I think the principle is that we're being good stewards of the city's residents' money. And I think that given that we have to comply with the travel procedures, that you use government rates, you don't stay at, you don't fly first class, you do the appropriately, fiscally responsible things, that then they will look at the purpose of the trip. So I think that reporting the purpose of the trip, the length of it, and knowing that we had to comply as we should with these procedures, actually, the more I think about it, I think that's sufficient. And then if somebody is very concerned for some reason, they can always access it because it is a public record.
So I think I'm going to be in the minority here. I just feel that public record request is actually not so easy to get, and a lot of people get turned down. And I think that we should make it easy for people so that we show there's nothing to hide here. But I might be a minority on that one, so we could probably split on that one. Okay.
Well, the thing is that all of these trips cost money, and if it's a trip that has a pretty big fee to it and it's in New York, you could go to a place that in Paris that doesn't have a fee, and it's about the same cost. So the perception out there, if we start publishing it's almost like we're being defensive about taking a trip to something that's outside the borders as opposed to inside the borders. And we shouldn't be defensive on any of it. We should be saying this is a good ROI for our citizens and we're good stewards. So that's why I don't think that, sort of throwing the number out there, it also could be, a very easy target for somebody to trivially make some conclusions about. that it's a boondoggle just because it's there, and putting the number up makes that even easier. And I'd rather have, deep dive reporters than just cursory stuff.
Okay, so we'll just have to split this one because I will be outvoted on this one. Okay, good. So anything else that we should add or discuss on 5? And should we just vote on 5 before we move to 6? Does that seem to make sense to you guys? Because we have a lot here already. You guys good? Good with? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So
And if I can just, because we'll be turning this into something to go into the handbook.
Yeah.
In general, just to kind of keep the new manicured version of us trying to have the handbook not look entirely like a Frankenstein, that we would take the intent and form of what you all adopt, and we
Yeah.
will create some language that reflects
Yeah.
That, and we'll bring that back.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure that was
makes
clear.
sense. Okay. Do either one of you guys want to make the motion? Okay. Okay. So
Are you gonna make it and then split things out?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do it?
Okay. So basically, make the motion to have international travel be approved for reimbursement. And basically everything you see from 6 through 14, except we're going to split out the economic line 8. We're going to split out the total budget amount, and we're going to split out having the expenses public or published. So 8, 13, 14. Yeah, 8, 13, 14.
Yeah, I do just think because the minutes of this meeting, we don't want it to look like we're voting against making them available to the public. They are available to the public as
I
public
said
records.
published.
Right, so
published.
we just need to
Yeah.
amend that.
Sorry about the last one. We were trying to stay with the conversation, and if you are splitting it out, then yes, it has to be the prior version of it. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
On 13, we have to make clear that that's total budget,
Total
domestic
budget.
and
Yes.
international.
Yes.
But since our assignment is to do international, it might look like we're saying
Yes,
40
that's
for-
true.
For international.
That's true. That's true. Okay, that's good catch.
So
Yes.
total budget, domestic. Oh, there we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know whether we need to write this all out or can we just make the motion that way and then you guys can handle the rest from this. Okay, so do you want to just do it a motion by line number? So basically split out 8, 13, and 14 and approve everything else.
That would work for me.
Okay, who wants to second it then?
I would.
Okay. Okay, do you want to take the vote? Oh, wait, sorry, it's sorry, it's so approving everything on the spreadsheet except 8, 13, 14. Yep.
Then we'll vote on 8, 13.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I guess it's really 5 through 7, right? Okay. Okay, great. Do you want to take the vote?
Well, you need your second up there. I was the
Oh,
second.
yeah, sorry.
Chair Tanaka,
Yes.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
Councilmember Lowing.
Yes.
Motion carries for numbers 5 through 7, 11, and 12.
Okay. And then 8, 13, 14.
Councilmember Vinker,
A point of order before we.
So I guess yes would mean we want it. And then I guess let's see. Actually,
Yeah.
so yeah.
further, yes. Okay. So let's see, how do we do this? So okay, 8 we could make it very simple. It's either yes or no. And the answer, I think my colleagues are probably gonna be no. I think 13 is I'm okay with 30, but my colleagues want to do actually if you guys do willing to do yeah, that's right. 8, 14 together and then 13
Right, so that's where we're gonna split.
It's the other way, it's the estimates are different.
Yeah, so we gotta make this clearer. So 8, let's do one at a time. Let's keep it simple. Let's do 8. So 8, basically, there has to be economic benefit. So 8 is yes, it has some economic benefit.
Included in the original vote.
No, 8 right now, we'll vote on 8. So 8, there's economic benefit. And then we'll take the vote on that.
Okay,
Probably the word benefits is good to have in there,
Yeah, that's right, economic benefit.
or even economic benefits required, something like
Required,
that.
yeah, that's a better way of saying it.
Councilmember Lowing,
No,
Councilmember Vinker,
No,
Chair Tanaka.
Yes,
Motion fails.
okay, and then let's do 13. So 13 is, I want 30, they want 40, so, let's just take the vote for 40K. So 13 is as written.
Chair Tanaka,
No,
Councilmember Vinker,
yes,
Councilmember Lowing,
yes,
motion carries.
okay, let's do 14 now. So I think you guys actually are, actually, yeah, so this is right. So this would be as written, and then you guys could vote.
so let's clarify the intent here now, what it means on the website. Is the
Just, I think as Councilmember Vinker talked about earlier, she said it doesn't have to be a special section. It could just be part of the, what would you say? The, I forgot what part you said. Informational report, yeah.
basically you're saying in addition to its status as a public record and being accessible for that reason, you want to also make it accessible on the city website.
As part of the informational report, yes.
But maybe maybe replace for the public with as part of an informational report?
Yeah, good point. Can we change that, Clerk? Okay, is that 14 clear? You guys clear?
Yeah, I'm clear.
Okay, do you want to take the vote?
Councilmember Lowing,
No,
Councilmember Vinker,
No,
Chair Tanaka,
Yes.
motion fails.
Okay, so let's do the last one, 6. Not 6, 15, whatever it is. Oh, yeah.
And just a process question. So as I mentioned, we will take this and try to write it as something that we can bring back to this committee, because then you'll need to recommend that blurb
Sure.
to the city council for inclusion in the handbook.
Okay.
Okay.
I think
Or we can take that straight to
you
council.
guys just take that straight to council.
Okay, that's
I mean, what do you guys think? You guys okay?
So we're gonna draft language based off of the motion that you just took, and we can take that straight to the city council as a whole. And just note some of these other things that you had as interest.
Well, there's
this-
two issues. One is we talked about having a second reading amongst ourselves at the next meeting, so that wouldn't have to go. And secondly, because of the no's here, we've got nothing in their place, so we have to come up with alternatives before we have anything to send to council.
Correct. That was my second question.
Okay,
for you.
okay, so it comes back then. Okay, that's fine.
Okay,
Okay,
thank
so
you.
yeah, okay, great. So let's can we go down the spreadsheet? There was one other question we were supposed to answer. Scroll down. Okay. So 16. Okay, first of all, time check. It's 9:54. We're 6 minutes before the meeting's supposed to end. Do you guys want to take this up now or hunt it for next time?
Number one, thank you for noting that it's coming up to 10 o'clock. Appreciate that. It seems to me that if we went to put a limit on this to 10:15, I'd be okay with it.
I would too, and I think maybe we can dispense with this fairly quickly.
I agree.
Okay, who wants to, I'm okay with going to 10:15. Actually, let me just message someone real quick. Oh, actually, it's okay. So yeah, who wants to talk about 16?
I would be happy to just observe that I don't know why we would treat the sister cities travel any differently. Because we still want to have the purposes we identified above, and we're still going to have the restrictions on the type of travel. And so I don't know. I would need to understand a reason for carving it out.
I agree with that. I think we talked, I think in some ways this could fit into the other one. If it's justified, go. If it's not justified, don't go, right?
Right.
So maybe that's, I don't know.
I completely concur, because unless there's sort of a second tier classification to this, I think it's part of what we already just discussed.
Okay, so really there's no action that we have to take then. We're done on time.
Well, we didn't add any specific number there, but I think we said earlier that that probably needs to go to finance.
Oh, well, I mean, we already have a travel budget for the other one, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think we're covered actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great, guys. Okay, so I think we're done with 3, and what we're going to do is cover the other items at some future agenda.
Okay, as we talk about that future agenda, can we
Sure.
just raise a couple of procedural questions here?
Sure. Yeah. So we're now closed. We closed item 3, and
Right.
now we're on future meetings and agenda.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a couple of requests, suggestions, sort of, not requests, in terms of how to process these whenever we get to them. Looking first at number 5, council liaisons to boards, and
Wait, which document are you referring to?
the first page of,
Oh, sorry.
of the 7 items, and item number 5, protocol section 2.8.
Oh, sorry. You're still talking about item 3.
No, I'm talking about of the 7.
Yeah. You're talking about item 3, which actually covers this.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. I thought you were done with 3. Sorry. Okay.
No.
Sorry. Okay.
It's the subsections then.
Sure. Sorry. Go ahead.
So number 5 talks about involving board or commission chairs in the process. So we need to have a structure to do that. And, you can figure that out as chair if you want, or we can just have a meeting, invite all the chairs of key commissions to one of our meetings and say, this could be a big deal or no deal, but you're the ones that need to be considered. And I know we're going to get differences of opinions.
I like the idea of inviting the other chairs.
Yeah,
I
because they
think
will
that's
have more
very-
involvement
yeah,
in the process,
absolutely.
and more stake in the outcome.
So can staff? Well, we could maybe.
can
I don't know if you have to vote on it, but basically, I think it would be great if. I think we have a unanimous opinion here that it'd be great for the chairs to be here, so they could be invited at that meeting, whatever that meeting is.
Sure, we'll work with the city clerk's office on that. If there are specific questions you want to share with them ahead of time, that would be good for us to know as staff.
I think it'd just be the intent.
Okay,
Council wants to know if we're doing the right things with liaisons. And the best people that can talk to us about that, representing their commission, is the chair of the commission.
okay.
And also say we don't have to do the same for everybody. If Park said we don't need a council member and UAC said it's essential, that's okay too. Do my colleagues agree with that direction?
Yeah.
Okay. And the other one I was wanting to talk about was the 8.2 censure language. I would really love to have the city attorney or somebody in her office be involved in drafting something for that, instead of us sitting here without legal experience. Sorry, 2 of us don't have legal experience.
I don't tend to censure people out, so it's a good.
Patents don't censure people.
Well, also there's a lot of freedom of speech for First Amendment right type things. So I think this is fraught with difficulty.
I'd love to have almost like short, but a normal staff presentation on what could work that we could talk about editing.
I think that's wise, and I'm happy to assist with that. As I recall, so tell me if I'm remembering this right, council also had an interest in, short of censure, other types of options that might be less.
Yeah.
So are you also authorizing me to maybe come up with a few of those, perhaps looking at some other agencies and how they do it, and bring those as options as well?
I think that would be great. Yeah.
Better than us making it up.
No,
So-
I think it's a healthy practice to provide us with alternatives to consider, and I think the thoughtfulness with which you could do that would be very helpful.
And the city council did have some language which the city attorney had looked at before, so we'll see if there's some tweaks to that in the language we bring back.
Yeah, I think the general interest was to have it expanded more, and it was a first attempt really to open the topic. And I think it does make sense to treat it more fully, given the importance of it.
Okay.
It's pretty serious stuff, so we need to get it right. And then the last thing I just want to say procedurally is that I like the way you called out the one thing that we knew we were going to talk about. And I think that should be the presumption that that's the only one, because some of these we would want to go back and really be prepared for and think through alternatives and so on. And doing that on the fly isn't going to be as productive. So appreciate the call out.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, and we just left it broad like that for if for some reason you were super efficient and you felt that
No,
you wanted to cover more. So we'll still make it broad, but I completely understand that you need the time to process these very meaty topics.
Thanks.
I might just suggest that at the meeting on 2.8 with the board and commission chairs, that we also discuss the item 4, section 2.2, refrain from lobbying board and commission members.
Oh, yeah, good
Right,
point.
because
Same
there's
time.
sort of couple, how, it's basically
we
all
should-
the
we should-
topic
we
of
should
how do
group them,
we
yeah.
interact well with our boards and commissions.
Yeah, we want to group the stuff to be efficient, so.
Yeah.
Good point. Okay, any other comments on this before we? Okay, great. Okay, we're officially done with 3 now. And then we're going back to future meetings and agendas. Let's see, any comments, questions, thoughts? Otherwise I have something really quick. So I was speaking with the city auditor a few days ago, and the city auditor wanted to have what was it called again? You wanted to have let's see. You wanted to add something to the agenda for next week or next time. Task orders. Yes, task orders. Yes. And I think I saw an email back, and I think you had a question, right? Or something like that.
We just wanted to confirm that agenda was okay. So the proposed agenda for the next meeting, which is actually only in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Just so you all are preparing yourself mentally for your next regular meeting on May 9th, is for the task orders from the auditor's office, and she would clearly state what they were. And then the race and equity update, which we moved from today's meeting to the meeting on the 9th. And then if you wanted us to bring one of these procedures and protocols item, it's available.
I think we should, maybe we could, maybe we could talk offline, but maybe one of them, for one that we're ready for, right? Because the one that
Yes.
the city attorney work on might take her some time to do, so, yeah. So we will, maybe you and I will figure out, so, okay, good. Does that seem reasonable to you guys? Okay, and you're good?
Yes.
Okay, I think we are done at 10:02, so we're done. Thank you, guys. Oh, actually, last thing before. So, I'm trying to make our meetings more efficient, which is why I really think the work going on trying to make that spreadsheet, I'm just trying to make it easier. So if you guys have suggestions, thoughts of how to, make these meetings as efficient as possible, let me know, right? But anyways, it's a little bit of experiment tonight. I don't know what you guys' thoughts about helpful, not helpful. I was hoping that she could do the pros and cons, but I could realize how hard it is for her to do that. But
Yeah, I think it was helpful to be able to have a good interchange amongst us without too much structure getting in the way. I do feel like our clerk had yeoman's task tonight. And
Yeah.
if there's some way we could be efficient without putting such a burden, that would be great. I also want to take a moment to thank our public commenters tonight and for such a helpful presentation.
of course. Any words? No? Okay, great. We're done, guys. Thank you.